Evening, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday, June 20, 2017 meeting of the Edina City Council. Roll call, please, Ms. Mangan.
Member Brendel?
Here.
Member Fisher?
Excuse me, Jane, I didn't even notice that you had subbed in for Deb Mangan.
Member Staunton?
Here.
Member Stewart?
Here.
Mayor Hovland?
Here. Spent an hour and a half with her upstairs and just assumed she was coming down here. Nice to have you with us. We have a form of meeting agenda in front of us this evening. Is there anyone on the council that wishes to modify the meeting agenda? All right, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda in its shown form, stated form.
So moved.
A motion is second to approve the meeting agenda in its presently published form. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say nay. Carried. Community comment. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address the council on any matter of concern to them that's not otherwise on the agenda this evening? Something not on the agenda this evening. Yes, come forward, please. You go around to the side podiums and tell us what your concern is.
Ms. Lorna W. Livingston. I live at 5920 Wooddale Avenue. And my problem is my water bill. It's way too high for me. I have cut back as far as I possibly can in the use of water, and my bill is still almost $40 a month. I'm on a very limited Social Security, and I talked to the water department, and asked them how it could be diminished, and they said I needed to talk to you. And so I'm talking to you.
Yeah, well, Ms. Livingston, yes, thank you for coming this evening. And I don't know, Manager Neal, who we should have Ms. Livingston visit with, maybe come and visit with you and talk about some of the programs that are possible.
With our public works staff, and we can get your name and your address from our water utility, and we'll have some money from our water utility talk with them, probably our director, Brian Olson.
$115. They said that I have 12,000 gallons of water used, and no way.
Okay.
All right, we'll try to figure out the source of the problem. So, yes, thanks for coming tonight.
They can do a leak detection, too.
They're charging me for what I'm not using.
They can do maybe they may need to do a leak detection look in the home.
Enough?
Sounds like you need a leak detection.
I just like to have a lower minimum bill.
Sure. Well, let's figure out what the problem is and try to get that bill lower.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Livingston. Anyone else? An unrelated topic. Yes, sir.
I'm Michael Barr, and I live at 5417 Woodcrest Drive, and this is in regards to the Arden Park restoration. We've lived on the creek for about a year, and it's just been it's an amazing wildness to the area. It's a real oasis in Edina, and I don't know that everybody can appreciate it unless you've walked around it and visited the area. Anyway, and that's what we like about Arden Park. It's not a well-manicured park. It's a wild park, a natural park. And going through with the restoration project, what we've seen, it's going to change everything totally. And just to I want to talk about just something that happened a couple weeks ago. There was a red-eared slider turtle that crawled into our yard, so we're up above the creek. So I took it down to above the dam, and it's kind of a ponded area. And I released it, and it's so clear. It's a very clear kind of a ponded area. Lots of fish there, and what we understand from the watershed, Minnehaha Watershed District, is that there isn't much life above the dam. The dam is slowing things down, and there's not much oxygen, and there's not much invertebrate life there, but there's tons and tons. And I don't think anyone's done a study to see just how much is really in there. This is just hearsay. The money's not there to do it, but it's a very, very pristine area. That area also seen lots of pileated woodpeckers, eagles, owls, great blue herons, egrets. I just saw a fox the other day run out of there, deer, toads, frogs, just an amazing array of wildlife. And if that dam is taken out, that ponding area will be gone, and we'll lose that forever. So I wish that everyone could go and appreciate the park like many of the residents do. We had a meeting last week with the Watershed District, and there was a huge number of people that turned out in support of keeping the park pretty much the way it is. So, and you may have heard about it, and that's why it's been delayed for another month. I think that's it. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. Yes, sir. Good evening.
My name is Martin Freeman. I live at 5637 Woodcrest Drive. I've been there for 25 years. I'm a professor of medicine at the U and chief of the GI division there. And, but I'm here to talk about the Arden Park restoration project as well. My main hobby is bird photography. I photograph all over the cities, and the best place for pinnacle wild birds and animals is Arden Park in the old growth trees. And you probably heard a lot about this. We had the hearing a couple of weeks ago, but I want to show you some of the pictures I've taken in the old growth trees in Arden Park above the waterfall, which are right in the area that they put the plan calls to put a pathway and bulldoze and redirect and so-called improve the creek. And I think it would be a tragedy. It's really a stunning area right in the middle. Let me show you these pictures.
If you put them down in the middle there, Doctor, we'll get a good view of them.
Here's, what I want to show you is not just the birds, but notice they're on dead trees, and they're old growth trees in the background. This is that little bend in Arden Park, right where they want to put the walkway. And the dead trees and the old growth trees are key to that. I'll show you, there's a bald eagle nest there for 4 years, right in that area, raised successive broods, and then they've moved right across the street, and they fish routinely in that still water above the dam. Let me show you. This picture is of a pair of bald eagles on their nest right in that area of old growth trees. They've now raised 2 young this year, 2 young, which shows that they have a very good food supply. And we've watched them catching fish in there. And then I think the best picture I've ever had the privilege to take, I want to show you. This is a male pileated woodpecker feeding its young, and it's in a dead old growth tree right in that section, in a patch of woods that has no formal paths in it. People walk through there with their dogs every now and then, but it's pretty pristine. And and then I'll just show you one more.
Yeah, those are great photos.
I was privileged to have that picture published in the New England Journal of Medicine as a photo filler. And I photograph birds all over the region, been travel a bit, and that patch in Arden Park is the most pristine, beautiful place I've seen. And there's a variety of birds and animals there that is stunning, and it's right in the heart of our town. And how you can improve that, I don't know. Bulldozers and redirecting the flow. I think if you talk to people who really spend time there, who won't, it can't be approved. And once you put in construction and bulldozers and pathways, that kind of pinnacle wildlife will go away and won't come back. So that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. Anyone else? Good evening.
Good evening, how are you? I'm Donna Callender. I live at 5415 Countryside Road. And I just wanted to say that I wish for a healthy, beautiful community that is in charge of its own destiny. Please stop destroying places that bring happiness to the people who pay for what you do. It's not right. Please leave the waterfall alone. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Callender. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. So, Ms. Livingston, we'll get someone to contact you on your water situation, see if we can't get that figured out. For the rest of you, thanks for your comments. We'll move on to the next portion of the agenda, which is the consent agenda. We're going to take off the consent agenda what's technically called 5F, which is the proposed development at Market Street, newly named Market Street, 49.5 Street. So that's coming off the consent agenda by determination of all of the council members and staff. And with the, is there anyone on the council wishes to take anything else off the consent agenda? Member Staunton.
Could I take item 5H off of the
5H, the traffic safety report?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to approve the balance of the consent agenda with the exception of 5F and 5H.
So moved.
Second.
Get a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda with the exception of 5F and 5H. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say nay. Carried. 5F, the proposed approval of the final development plan for the Edina Market Street project. We're going to go to Manager Neal for a little backgrounding first for the council and the members of the audience. And then
Mr. Teague.
we're going to go over to Director Teague, who's going to bring us up to speed on what's happened between the time this council approved this project on a preliminary basis after public input and then the conditions that were imposed, whether or not the developers met those conditions. Manager Neal.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 5F is an action by the council that grants final approval, rezoning and site plan approvals for the Market Street redevelopment proposal. The action, which is by both resolution and ordinance by the City Council, was scheduled for tonight's consent agenda because that's our protocol for final approval actions that are compliant with conditions that you set forth as City Council during the preliminary approval, public hearing, and council consideration stage of our process. In our municipal development approval process, the important discussions and decisions really occur at the preliminary approval step. For the Market Street proposal, that step occurred on April 18th. The council's analysis that night was thoughtful and thorough. The council's consideration of the Market Street proposal that night was 4 hours and 11 minutes long and included a public hearing where 32 people testified about the proposal. It is our practice that following preliminary approval actions, the proponent of the project has a choice. They can accept the terms and conditions of the council's preliminary approval and move forward to final approval, or they can suspend their proposal if they feel they cannot accept the council's conditions. The benefit of this practice for the proponent is that if they accept the council's preliminary approval terms and conditions, the council's final approval is granted with no additional terms or conditions. Because the final approval does not include additional review or discussion, it's normally considered a consent agenda item. But staff does understand the significance of tonight's action on the Market Street proposal and wishes to give the council the assurance that its preliminary approval terms and conditions have been included in the final approval action for tonight. So I've asked Community Development Director Mr. Teague to provide a review for you of those terms and conditions so that you can be assured that they are included in the final, and if they're not included in the final, that they are included in the relevant step of the development process. Mr. Teague.
Thank you, Manager Neal. Director Teague, thank you.
Yes, thank you. So, as mentioned, you held a public hearing back in April. The approvals that night included a comprehensive plan amendment in regard to height and density. Right now, that's out for review of our neighboring communities. We're waiting for feedback, and then we will submit that comprehensive plan amendment to the Met Council for approval. So the action that evening included preliminary rezoning and establishment of the PUD 12 zoning district. So we're creating a specific zoning district down there. That was first reading. Tonight would be second reading. So the conditions that were placed on that preliminary approval, there was quite a long list of them, but there were a few action items that the applicant and staff were asked to complete before we came to the council for final approval. First was the construction of the site improvement performance agreement. That agreement has been drafted by the city attorney. The city's reviewed it. The applicant has reviewed it. That's included in your packet this evening for approval. So that was one of the conditions that's been satisfied. The second was we asked them to provide a plan that would minimize impacts during construction and then submit a construction phasing plan. So the applicant has done that. That's included in your packet this evening. It's a series of about 5 pages that are in your attachments for how that construction phasing is to occur. Some of the more significant items that the applicant will be doing to address that issue of the parking during construction. One, the idea of constructing or adding on to the north ramp as the first step of construction. So additional parking spaces would be provided once that middle ramp goes away. So to provide extra parking spaces during construction. They've also submitted a plan for valet parking that's noted on those construction management plans for users of the businesses. They would have an opportunity to take advantage of that valet parking along 50th. Another condition that was added was a request by the council to take a look at traffic impacts. And so we, staff along with our SRF, to take a look at the impacts on the adjacent roads, some of the local streets, like Maple, Towns, and Bruce. That was the presentation that Director Milner gave to the council at your last city council meeting to address some of those additional concerns. So that has been completed. So those are the 3 main items that have been completed since the preliminary approval. The applicant, they have submitted their final development plans. They are all consistent with what was originally approved in terms of the height, the density, the location of the buildings, the building materials. All of that is the same as you had originally approved. There are some conditions that are checked at the time of building permit. As an example, the condition that I believe it was Councilmember Staunton requested in regard to the lighting. So that condition carries through, and that's condition number 4, where the final lighting plan must meet all minimum requirements of city code, and lighting on the top floor of the parking ramp on the north side of excuse me, of Market Street be built into the sides of the wall and directed downward to screen the neighborhood from the north. So that's something that we would review specifically at the time of building permit. Additional conditions include the screening of rooftop mechanical equipment, the provision of the 10% affordable housing. Some of that detail gets worked out in the redevelopment agreement, but the condition holds that 10% of the units need to be provided for affordable housing. The city engineer's review memo and the conditions that were outlined there, that's another condition that carries forward. The findings of the traffic study and the conditions required therein. Approval of Metropolitan Council for the comprehensive plan amendment. The city can't issue a building permit for the residential piece or the south side until that comprehensive plan amendment is approved. There's a provision for public art that would be worked out in the future. And of course, all of this is still contingent on approval of the sale of the property. That brings you up to date with the conditions that were included and some of the steps that have taken since the preliminary approval. So with that, staff would recommend that you approve the final rezoning and it would be the second reading of the PUD 12 zoning ordinance.
Thank you. Member Staunton.
A few questions, Director Teague. The construction phasing, is there also a construction management plan that'll be part of this?
That is typically another document that's required at the time of building permit, where they talk about parking of construction vehicles, those types of things.
So one of the things that I think is important in this situation, it's going to be a complex project that's going to create some disruption. We want to minimize that disruption. We want to make sure we're addressing issues immediately as they arise. And I know I had talked with Mr. Neuendorf earlier this week about efforts we've made in the past to task a specific person with kind of managing the outreach to the community, whether that be the businesses in the area, the residents who live in the area, others who obviously liaison with the developer and the construction management. I think it's going to be critical that we make sure that small problems not turn into big problems. So we have to be on this, and I would even recommend that we figure out some small group that, connects with the stakeholders, whether that be residents in the area, the business. I think the 50th and France Business Association is a natural connection, so that we're making all that happen. Manager Neal, did you have?
I would just say, Councilmember Staunton, we did something similar to that when we did the last major project in the 50th and France area. Yeah, and we concur with you that having a point person to connect with property owners and tenants in the area is absolutely essential for a project of this nature.
So that doesn't really, we've got the construction management as part of our normal process, so we don't need to include that as a condition. It's not something we're asking them, we're asking them to submit a plan, but that's in the normal course of any building permit, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Couple other issues, lighting, thank you for including that condition. I think that's really important. The landscaping, do the conditions address the landscaping? We talked about there's a couple of landscaping components. One is on the rear of the parking ramp along that whole area adjacent to some single family, some duplex residential properties back there. We've talked about landscaping both on our property and then the possibility of offering landscaping on those properties if that, if they find that advantageous to helping with the screening. Is that part of the conditions here?
The potential of locating landscaping on adjacent properties is not. So that's something that we would have to add.
Again, when I spoke with Mr. Neuendorf, he suggested that there have been some discussions at the staff level about the possibility of making that available. I don't know, is that the developer's proposal, or are you familiar with that?
I know there has been some discussion from the developer with those property owners. I'm not sure if anything specific has been agreed to, though.
Well, I'd like to include at least some reference to that in our final approvals. And then with respect to the traffic impacts, we did have a presentation by Director Milner and a review by an outside consulting firm about traffic issues. And, I think we're going to need to really manage this. What kind of comes to mind for me is the way we reacted on the 169 closure. And I thought we did a nice job of sifting through options of reacting to the situation as it unfolds. Especially as we're going through this interim period during construction, I think it's going to be very important for us to again be nimble in our response and in trying some things that are options for seeing if we can improve traffic. To be clear, I am not as troubled as some by the slowing of traffic that is pass-through traffic. We have a lot of traffic in this area, but the people who are going from point A in Minneapolis to point B in West Edina and are going through this area, if they have to slow down, that's okay with me. I think that makes this a more pedestrian-friendly and more of a place. Same thing if they're going from Excelsior to the crosstown and they're taking France Avenue through there. If they have to slow down, that's fine with me. What I do want to be sensitive to is those who choose to start cutting through the neighborhood, and I want us to be able to respond to that, especially from a speed perspective as they go through the neighborhood, so that we're being responsive to that. I recognize that that's going to be an ongoing issue that we're going to have to react to, and I would imagine that staff and maybe that construction management group will be we'll be touching on that as well. So those are my questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Member Sutton. Member Fisher?
Thank you. I just have a couple things. One of them, and I realize it's not on our list of requirements, but I believe we talked about it, or maybe I was just thinking about it. If you look at in the packet, in the architectural drawings of the underground parking on the south, the south development, there's a note that says hold out for future expansion, and I'm assuming the inference there is a knockout panel in the structural wall of the underground parking. And I think it's really important that we're building this thing one time, and who knows, 10, 20 years from now, if anything gets redeveloped right on 50th, and they were to try to put underground parking there, I don't think we would ever want an entrance to underground parking off of 50th. So we already have an entrance off of Market Street. The simple act of putting knockout panels, I would actually argue probably one on each end of this ramp at the end of the drive aisles, is just a minimal expense today, but it would be amazingly, it would look really smart 20 years from now if we ever needed to expand the underground parking. And I think it would probably have to happen at both levels. So I'm not sure how we go about, I'd like to put that on the list of important items that we should look at. Another element that, so I've gotten a lot of correspondence about, we've gotten a lot of correspondence on this, right? Both positive and negative. But one of the comments was, are we making a mistake by not building more parking, like another level, going down one more level? And I understand as we've gone through these discussions that we'd be getting into the water table, and that becomes problematic. But it's really caused me to think about, and the point is, we need convenience parking. We don't want to get too far away from, the businesses on 50th, and we've talked about the dentist and the doctor and all that. But I've come to a good place on this, because I was, you kind of question, are we doing the right thing? And just to be clear, the premise of what we're doing is we're creating more parking spaces, but we're putting them on the north ramp. And by improving the retail environment, the pedestrian environment, we're saying that it'll be a pleasant experience to get there, so more people would want to park in the north ramp. Jennifer, can you bring up that PowerPoint? So last night I was just struggling with this. This is our last chance to make sure, if we're going to change our minds, it's right now. And I'm very comfortable not changing. I mean, I think we're on the right path. And the way I convinced myself last night is I was looking at aerial photos of this area, and then I just kept scrolling down to the Southdale area, and I got to Target. And, all of us shop there at one time or another, right? And we never think about the experience there. So this is the aerial of, this is our area. And Jennifer, you can just point out the north ramp just to get people oriented. Up and to the left, right there. Sorry, I should have warned you about this. I'm just going to throw things at you. And then the center ramp is right below that. So now just hit the button and let this, so now if you overlay Target, where we all go shop all the time, but keep that north ramp in place, that's the equivalent distance you would be walking to get to those parking spaces. We don't even blink about going to Target and walking that far to get to our car. I would argue the experience here is going to be 100 times better than walking through the Target parking lot. So I've come to a place where I'm super excited about what we're actually doing, because I think it's going to work. So that's all I had.
Thank you. And Member Fisher, thank you for illustrating that so well, because one of the comments that I do hear is, but I have to park where I'm going. I have to be able to park adjacent to where I'm going. If I'm going there, I want to park in the middle ramp. And the north ramp is just not that far away. So thank you for that illustration. I guess one of the questions I'm hearing most often is during construction, if I have a dentist appointment, if I have a chiropractor appointment, am I going to be able to get there? And so I guess I don't know, Carrie, if this belongs in one of the points in the development agreement or where it might belong. But to make sure that wherever those points are where a valet would be, where a person would meet a valet, or where a person would be able to be dropped off for an appointment would be accessible. So wheelchair accessible, walker accessible, so it would have a curb cut and not a standard bulkhead curb. So anticipating that when people want to get to their service provider for the appointment that they have, that they aren't impeded by a curb. So the construction period is going to create some challenges, and so we want to make sure that not only do our businesses be able to continue their business, but also the people who want to get there can get there without trouble with accessibility.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have the luxury of going after all these other smart people. I agree with what has been said regarding the construction phasing and the management of the construction and the lights and the landscaping and the traffic impacts. So thank you for all of that. One thing that I want to dovetail, I believe it was Member Fisher who was talking about this knockout panels to have some expansion of the underground parking. I do think we need to ensure that in the legal documents with this developer we have an easement of some sort to enable us to have access to expanded underground parking should that eventuality take place. And then with respect to the traffic impacts, I agree. I think it was Member Staunton who said we need to be nimble. Yes, we do, and I think that means we need to open up really clean lines of communication right away with Hennepin County because both 50th and France Avenue are county roads, and so we want to make sure that they are able to react with us. If any, I don't know if we'd have turns affected off of those roads to avoid some of the through neighborhood traffic, or if it's something like the temporary speed bumps that we've used on occasion. So I don't know what the reactions may need to be, but if we slow traffic on 50th or slow traffic on France, I think we can count on more people cutting through neighborhoods. That's a natural result. And we do want to prevent that as much as we can. Finally, I'll just mention, I think the world of retail is really in a state of flux these days. And it's been a very, very difficult operation. Amazon, other online businesses are very much changing the playing field for retailers. And 50th in France has always been a great little retail area, great place to visit and hang out. But we have had 3 businesses close at 50th in France in the last few months. So it hasn't been all sunny skies there. And we have to remember now that we are competing not only with those online businesses, we're competing with some other areas, Excelsior Grand or the West End. These are areas that are attracting a lot of customers for more of that experience where you park and move around to different places. And so we want to have this whole 50th in France area be able to compete and compete effectively with some of those places. So I think this is really important. But one thing that I want to encourage everybody who's listening tonight to do is, especially during the time of construction, please continue to patronize these businesses. Yes, it'll be a little difficult during this time of construction, but it's so important for our health of our businesses that we don't avoid shopping there or eating there, that we continue to patronize those businesses. So that's all. Thank you.
The council's comments on construction management were well-placed. I would urge staff to look back. Carrie, I think this predated you, but when the 5000 France was built, right at the corner of 50th and France, and wrapped that corner all the way down to Salute, there was a very effective construction management plan in place for that for well over a year's period of time, and things seem to function down there pretty well. So you might want to take a look at that particular plan. I think also with respect to the proposed number of units, I think it's 110, that people are, at least in my mind, people are moving there so they don't have to use their cars very often. And there are going to be a lot of empty nesters that are going to be gone in the wintertime. So I'm more concerned about what Member Staunton has alluded to, and that is pass-through traffic. People coming from southwest Minneapolis, heading westbound, coming home at night. That's the volume of traffic that I see. And so we want to be vigilant about all of that. There were, between the preliminary approval on the 18th of April and today, 2 months and 2 days, the applicant and our staff was working on the conditions that this council imposed on preliminary approval. And there were 19 some conditions, and Director Teague has gone through many of those. And so Director Teague, to Member Staunton's point earlier about the landscaping plan, I've added a condition 20 and passed it over to Member Staunton to take a look at it, and it would read as follows: staff approval of a landscape plan on private property on the north side of the north ramp. So we're putting that onus on you to be comfortable with the landscape plan that gets proposed by the developer should this project be approved in a final way tonight. So, what you've provided us in the interim period with all the work that you've done, we've got the two resolutions, or the resolution, the ordinance, final plans and narrative, final architectural drawings, final landscape drawings, final civil drawings, approved preliminary plans, of course. City engineers had a review memo dated June 14th, which I thought was excellent, Director Milner, that addressed all of the issues that are civil, architectural, and landscape related. And in your 3-page letter has, many conditions that you've indicated are satisfied or yet to be satisfied that you'll take care of if they do file for if they do proceed, which I'm assuming they would. So we've got in front of us 3 things. I don't know if we could do it by common motion or a single motion.
Mr. Mayor,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think the other one that's important to add as a condition is this notion of an easement in the underground parking on the south parcel, along with the knockout panels.
Yeah.
So this planning for the future.
Okay, good thought. Easement for future
access
underground
from Market
parking
Street
access
to the properties on the north side of 50.
And I'll hand you this, Director Teague, afterwards, but the language that Member Staunton had, I think, works well, and it's easement for future underground parking access for the properties located on the north side of 50th Street. That language seems satisfactory to you. Member Stewart, that language seems satisfactory? Accomplished the goal you intended, so that's condition number 21. All right, so can we handle this on a single motion, Director Teague?
I believe you can. Could I offer a couple other suggestions?
Sure.
Just so it's clear, could we add the condition about the construction management plan at the time of building permit? And then I did catch one change I'd like to make in the ordinance 2017-05. It says the ordinance is effective immediately. It should read, this ordinance is effective upon approval from the Metropolitan Council of the comprehensive plan amendment. We can't adopt a zoning ordinance that's in conflict with our comprehensive plan.
So in section 2, the ordinance is effective upon approval by the Metropolitan Council?
Correct. Of the comprehensive plan amendment.
All right, I'm wondering if we should take them one at a time.
I'm happy doing them all together.
All right, so what I've added is condition 22, which is the submission of a construction management plan to staff. What's the timing of that?
At the time of building permit.
With those three conditions being added to Resolution 2017-60 and the change on the proposed ordinance, there are three things we could handle by single motion. That would be adopting modified Resolution 2017-60, granting second reading of Ordinance 2017-05, which has been modified, and then approving the final rezoning from PCD2 Planned Commercial District to PUD 12 Planned Unit Development, and then finally the approval of the Site Improvement Performance Agreement. Those four elements. All right, is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Got a motion and a second to adopt all those matters stated. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you. All right, the next matter was, on the consent agenda, was something that Member Staunton. Pardon me?
H.
Yep. Thank you. Traffic safety report, which is 5H. Member Staunton.
So really just a question that's specific to this for Director Milner, but also I think applies in a lot of other places. One of the first item was a request for reduction of speed limit in the Highlands neighborhood on Ayrshire. And there was also some requests for some new speed limit signage, and I understand the recommendation is to do some new signage placement, but you're recommending that we not change the speed limit from the 30 miles an hour to the 20 miles an hour that was requested. And I thought one of the things that this is, we see these a lot, and I'm interested in just a recap for folks who might be interested about what constraints we have, if any, on changing the speed limits in these neighborhood streets. I live in this neighborhood, and I'm very sympathetic to the request because I know folks who are leaving Vernon to go into the neighborhood and are on the other end of the neighborhood are anxious to get there as quickly as they can, and sometimes maybe go a little faster than some of the neighbors would like. And so I'm interested in what the protocols are and what the scope of our authority is on changing those speed limits.
Yeah, Councilmember Staunton, in order to change the speed limit outside of 30 miles an hour by state statute, you need to first conduct an engineering study. And then you have to have one of these other two things. It either needs to have a bicycle facility, so an on-street bike lane, or it needs to be near a school, so a school zone. So you see on 70th Street, that one's 25 miles an hour, and it had the study completed, and it had bike facilities. And on the east side, it's near the elementary school. So you can't arbitrarily just change speed limits on a local street. You need the study with either near schools or with a bike facility.
This one is somewhat near a school. Does this count as near a school?
Not close enough.
No.
Not close enough. All right. All right, well, that's helpful information. Thank you.
Would you care to move the matter, Member
So
Staunton?
moved.
All right. Is there a second?
Second?
We got a motion and a second to approve the traffic safety report of May 3rd, 2017. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say nay. Carried. Now, that completes the consent agenda, and we'll move on to special recognitions and presentations. And we have our Assistant Finance Director, Kyle Sawyer, with us this evening, and our main auditor, Mr. James Eichten from MMKR, who is going to come and give us a report, I think, on the results of the audit this year. Mr. Sawyer, thank you. I'll let you lead off.
Throughout the year, the Finance Department is responsible for the accounting for the city. At the end of the year, we are also required to have an audit done by an independent accounting firm, MMKR in this case. So. You all should have a copy of the comprehensive annual financial report in front of you, or it's like we like to call it in the finance department, the CAFR. So we have Jim Eichten here from MMKR. He's a managing partner there, and he's here to tell us more about the audit, their opinion, and the CAFR itself. So, thanks.
Thank you. Mayor, members of council, administration, Scott, I would say, if he was here. My name is Jim Eichten. I'm here this evening to provide a presentation of the audit for the city of Edina for the year ended December 31st, 2016. I did provide a PowerPoint to go through the reports. But first, probably most important element of the audit is to understand the purpose for me being here. It is a requirement in state statute that the city of Edina have an annual financial report prepared. That financial report is then submitted to the Office of the State Auditor here in the state of Minnesota. It is a requirement that that financial statement be audited by an independent certified public accountant, a CPA, and that is really my role in being here. As part of that audit process, we are required to report to the governing body, which is the City Council, and you are required then to accept the report, which I'll be looking for at the end of my presentation. We do issue, as I mentioned, an opinion on your financial statements. We're also required then to issue an opinion on any other number of required elements of an audit. First of all, which includes the testing of internal controls of the city. We also test your compliance with laws and regulations that relate to the financial reporting or any other requirements related to the financial report. We're also then required to audit your compliance with state laws and regulations, which are guided by the Office of the State Auditor. They provide us with a list of the state statutes that we test. We don't test every law, only those laws that they give us a list. And the list does change depending on their needs or some elements of change based on risks that they see on their end. Lastly, we would have completed an audit of the single audit. The single audit is an audit of your federal awards. You're only required to have that audit if you were to have received more than $750,000 of federal revenue. The city did not exceed that threshold this year, so that portion of the audit was not completed. In my reports that I provided this evening, I provide the council with a management report. That management report really is my document that provides the information that summarizes the audit results, provides some meaningful information in terms of how the audit went, but also provides a nice presentation tool for this presentation. So in the first part of the document, I do provide the audit results for the year. First and foremost, I did provide the opinion on the financial statements, which was a clean opinion. Technically, it was an unmodified opinion. That was the opinion you were looking for going into this audit. So very good result in that regard. And I did mention the other opinions I provided. There were no findings to report in either of those two opinions as well. So a clean audit for the city this year. That isn't always the case, so you should be commended for that result as part of this audit presentation. Any audit really has two parts. The first part of the audit is really how are you doing on the compliance side, which I just addressed. And then secondarily to that, how are you doing on the financial side. And I do provide in my management report some of financial information. I'm not going to go into too much detail. Certainly that management report provides a lot of detail on the financial results, but I'll just touch on a few of the elements quickly as part of my presentation. So we do provide information on property taxes, including the market values of the city. This presentation, which is shown on page 4 of my report, shows some trends in market value. You're seeing this data is as of the taxable year 2016, which is taxable market values as of January 1st of 2015. So it does actually go back a ways. You can see the downturn in the economy after the 2008 fiscal year or tax year. And then you are seeing increasing market values in our community of the city of Edina, but also the metropolitan area. You'll find this graphical presentation is almost identical for almost every city in the state, or at least maybe not the state, the metropolitan area. We do provide information on tax rates. The city does have a lower than average tax rate, both as a total, but also as a city, when you compare yourselves to other cities in the state as well as in the other cities in the 7-county metro area. What that means to the city, even though you have a lower than average tax rate, you do experience higher than average property tax revenues based on a variety of factors. This particular presentation shows revenues on a per capita basis. The city has about $1,200, $1,247 in revenue on a per capita basis. Most of that is in property taxes. which finances most of the general fund operations of the city. On the expenditure side, we do report some information on the expenditures on a per capita basis. Some of the highlights there shows that your current spending on a per capita basis is about $100 more than average of an average city of your size. Most of that is actually occurring within the public safety arena, and most of that relates to the city has a full-time fire department. You can see also on that page, the area of debt service, the city spends about $150 per resident on debt service, which is almost identical to other cities of your size, which is important, shows good quality debt management on the part of the city. Overall, the general fund financial position this year increased. You saw an increase in the overall general fund financial position. You ended the year with a fund balance that was about 54% of your overall operations. The city is guided by a fund balance policy that suggests a range of between 42 to 47% of fund balance at the end of the year. It is typical protocol for the city to then take that policy and build that into future budgets in terms of what to do with the excess that would come out from this presentation, and I'm sure that will occur in the near future. My presentation does show some other trends that I'd like to point out. Certainly, the general fund revenues, most of the increases in revenues in the general fund are funded by property taxes. That is a very typical presentation of every city in the state. You're seeing very little increases in other revenue sources in the state. And also on the expenditure side of the equation, you're seeing significant increases in the area of public safety. Most cities are seeing dramatic increases in public safeties within the metro area, really seeing flat increases in almost every other category, and Edina is no different. We also present information on your enterprise funds. You have a number of enterprise funds. Enterprise funds are operations that really run like businesses. The utility fund is probably the most significant fund of the city. You can see on this particular presentation, the green bar identifies how you're doing from a net income perspective or an operating income perspective. You can see some some consistent positive operating results in the utility fund. 2016 is no different. The liquor fund is also a significant operation of the city. The city's liquor fund did see some downturns in the overall revenue due to market conditions last year. You're also seeing slight downturns in operating gross profit, but in 2016 you saw some slight improvements, which is again very similar to the market that's happening all over our city governments in the metropolitan area. Almost identical results. And the last graph I'd like to point out is the golf course fund. The golf course fund does show some downturns in the operating results, but it is important to note that the 27-hole course was closed in July of 2016 for construction. So some of these financial results may need to be reanalyzed once the information comes forth. So in summary, I did issue a clean opinion on on the city's basic financial statements. It was an unmodified opinion, what you were looking for. We did not have any findings to report. I did mention the city's experiencing continued overall improved financial results. And lastly, I want to point out a couple of things. Certainly that the financial records of the cities continue to be in excellent condition. The information you're receiving it does mimic the information you're getting on a consistent basis. But lastly, I wanted to point out that the audit went very smooth this year, probably more smooth than maybe it would have been anticipated considering some of the turnover that took place on city staff. You typically see in an audit when you have some turnover in finance, some difficulties in the audit. And this audit went very smooth, and the current staff that was in place did an excellent job of transitioning and getting a smooth audit as a result. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Mr.
that you have
Eichten.
for me.
Questions for Mr. Eichten or comments? Member Stewart?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple things. Mr. Eichten, you and I had a chance to speak on the telephone yesterday. I appreciate you taking my call. And you gave me an opportunity to probe a little bit at the audit and some of the things. I noted the clean opinion. We also talked about the change of personnel. Eric Rogeman resigned probably in the middle of your process. Is that right? And
Yes.
I just want to special thanks to Kyle Sawyer for the great work to keep things going forward and really give us a great result, a very smooth audit. A couple of things that we noted and that I'll talk about from some of those charts that you mentioned. First of all, I know you're not a finance in terms of the credit ratings, but we do have a AAA credit rating as a city, and there's nothing in the report and nothing that you saw that should impact our AAA credit rating. There's only one direction it could go, so an impact means an adverse impact. So, and we're pleased to be at that level. In terms of the funds, your chart showed the only category that went down is the intergovernmental changes, and so I think in 2016 we reduced how much we transferred out of the liquor fund into some of the other funds, and that would be the reason, and those are pretty small bars comparatively speaking. Yeah. But that's the one place, and we've certainly talked about that at some length. The other thing about having a municipal liquor store is it's unique in terms of the whole of city operations, both in the sense that it's really a competitive business that we're in there, and it's also one that has an inventory, which is, we don't, for the most part as a city government, we don't have a lot of inventory, certainly not inventory for retail sale. And those things all found to be in order, no material changes that or differences that you found in that, and so that was all good. Public safety expenditure is up, and we actually recently saw a report on our public safety needs as we look to the future that suggests we may continue to have increases in our public safety spending as a city, but it's an important priority for us to keep the public safe. So that's one thing we'll have to wrestle with as we look to the future. And then you and I also talked, I know that as an accounting firm, you do not inspect our infrastructure. You do not go down and look at our sewers and our water pipes and things. But one of the things that I think you could opine on is that the level of spending that we as a city do to maintain and fix our infrastructure is consistent with what you would expect from a city of our size with an age of infrastructure that we have. Is that right?
Yeah, the trend lines that we see in that regard are consistent.
So I think as far as we know, at least from the financial side, we seem to be spending the right amount to do the right amount of maintenance for keeping those systems in place. And that, of course, is also an important priority for us. So we're very pleased. Hats off to city staff, all city staff, and Kyle and the whole department, and Jeff, our new head of our finances. We're pleased to have all of that in place and have that transition take place without any major hiccup to our systems. And we're very pleased with the outcome of the audit. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Member Brindle.
Mr. Eichten, I really don't have any questions at all, just a thank you. It's really with great pride. This is one of these times that we look at the health of our city, and we really are a healthy city. And so thank you for your professionalism and great report. And it wouldn't be a great report if we didn't have a great staff that produces good results. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Member Fisher?
I'll just make a short comment, but first I'm going to react to a really good idea. You know, we never do that. We never have finance people go down into our sewers. And why not, right? No, I would just say the first time I've read through one of these, and it's not the way I thought I would spend my Saturday evening, but it actually is quite interesting and well put together, and I would thank you for that. And again, thanks to our staff.
Good. Anything else for council? Again, Mr. Eichten, thank you for the fine job your organization does, making sure that everything has been properly audited here. And we don't thank you for the good outcome, but we thank our staff. And We thank you for being thorough in your work and analyzing their work. So,
Thank you.
again, we'll look forward to seeing you next year.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor? I'd move approval I'd move that we accept the 2016 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report.
Thank you.
Second.
We got a motion and a second to accept the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, CAFR, for the year ended December 31, 2016. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Carried. Next matter, and the final matter in this portion of the agenda, our own Kaylin Edina has this report on the May Speak Up Edina presentation involving water.
Hi, Mayor, members of the City Council. Thank you for having me tonight. So I am Kaylin Edina, the Senior Communications Coordinator with the city, and I'm here to speak about our May discussion for Speak Up Edina. Speak Up Edina is our citizen engagement platform, our resident engagement platform. Each month we host a discussion on various subjects. In May, our conversation was on water conservation. And some questions we asked were, how do you conserve water at your home, apartment, or work? What challenges do you face when trying to conserve water? How can the city encourage water conservation? And then weather is becoming more extreme. Heavy rains and long, hot droughts can make managing turf a challenge. What alternatives to traditional lawn and lawn care practices have you implemented, and what would you be willing to try? The conversation was open in all of May. We had 33 comments in total, and if you'll notice, we had fewer comments with this conversation because we closed the conversation on Nextdoor to comments per their privacy policy. So we didn't get comments on Nextdoor like we have in the past. We had 428 new visitors to the site, or total new sessions to the site, and 553 in total. And there were 1,500 roughly page views. Some common themes that I found when reading through all of the comments were commenters, they do everything from buying water efficient appliances, they reduce water use in their lawn and use water within their lawn. Some people were very disciplined when it came to reusing water. They even saved water from their washing machine and then used that to clean their bathtubs. And so there were some people who were very efficient with their use of water. And the respondents got into some great discussion on this topic, going back and forth, throwing out ideas, supporting one another in conserving water. We all know it's an important issue, and so it was nice to hear those comments and that people are supporting one another. Lawn maintenance was a big one. Lawn maintenance takes up a lot of our water resources in the summer months. And so it was a major part of the conversation. People saw that some irrigation systems were running at unnecessary times. Some they even saw were running while it was raining outside. So they had conversations about that. Also, the sprinklers hitting cement instead of the lawns. Respondents varied in conversation practices from growing longer turf grass to carving out more room for perennials or native plants, also to hiring a company to manage the yard as a prairie, similar to what we have at our public works facility. Respondents were interested in more incentives, technical assistance to convert lawns, and utilizing permeable pavers. So they were really interested in what education tools and resources we have to offer, or if we can give them direction to go to another organization that does that kind of education. Some questions raised by the respondents were, how do you get people to care about this issue? That's a major challenge that I think our staff in engineering that deals with water, and then our sustainability coordinator, Tara Brown, how do we get people to care about this important issue? And then how do we look at lawns differently? Everybody has a pretty green grass lawn, and that's the norm nowadays, but how can we have residents look at that differently to conserve water in that source, or that way? What did respondents ask of the city? I pulled out some of these specifics. I thought they were important, and they asked us to be a role model by using alternatives to grass lawns. So I think, once again, Public Works is an excellent example of that. Also boulevards where we have perennials that grow or other native plants. Some people wanted to be incentivized, so water billing structure to encourage conservation. We have that right now, but maybe they want to see it even more extreme. Rebate programs from rain barrels to smart sensors for irrigation. And then the technical assistance, like the organizations that offer education and resources, such as Metro Blooms. And I know in communications we've worked with those organizations to promote some of their programs that they hold at our facilities. And then enforce the current every other day water ordinance that we have. You have any questions about the water conservation conversation in May?
Questions by council members? Yeah, I think it's a fascinating topic, and you've given me some ideas for future work session conversations on yard conversion or smart sensors. You know, I don't know what the cost of smart sensors are, but it might be something we want to
Yeah, smart sensors.
look at and
They're
try to
pretty
market
cheap,
or
actually.
sell.
We use one that's $20.
Well, there you go.
Yep.
Pays itself off after a
Yep.
while. An interesting comment that one of the commenters had was about a certain grass seed. I can't remember what it's.
Pearl.
Yes, pearl. And
Yeah.
it doesn't even need to be mowed once a month or something, and
Yeah,
it doesn't
it's-
need to be watered.
It's a long root, so it goes deep for water and apparently stays healthy even in drought conditions. So
Yeah. So I thought
Member
that was
Stewart.
fascinating.
that's what I was going to ask about.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right. Other questions, comments? Yeah.
No?
Thanks
All
for
right.
And thanks to our residents for the good feedback.
Yeah, in June we have our conversation, or right now it's going on, so get on Speak Up Edina and comment on food trucks. We had a conversation many years ago about food trucks, however this is kind of a follow-up. In 2014, City Council amended a city ordinance to allow food trucks in Edina in conjunction with an event. So this conversation is opening that up to just allowing food trucks in Edina in general. What does the public feel about that? And then how do we protect our brick and mortar businesses? And where would residents like to see them in the city? So that's an active conversation.
Good. Thank
All
you.
right. Yeah,
Ms.
thank you
Agnes.
very much.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to the public hearing portion of the agenda. We've got 4 public hearing matters in front of the council this evening, and the first public hearing matter, the presentation is by our own Jeff Brown, and this matter concerns a potential certification of an abatement of a public health nuisance, which
Thank you,
we
Mayor.
do through a public hearing process. Mr. Brown, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Hovland, members of the council. This item is about the property at 425 Jefferson Avenue. A fire occurred at the property last June. The fire department then forwarded the issue to the health division after uncovering the fire damage and the conditions of the property. The health division then investigated and ended up declaring the property a public health nuisance. In that case, we attempt to work with the property owner to abate the nuisance. In this case, that did not occur over, at all. After many attempts by staff to coordinate with the property owner. So when that happens, the city does contract with a service provider, in this case Service Master, to go in and do the work and abate the nuisance. And then the property owner is given the opportunity to pay the service provider directly, which in this case did not happen. And so now the cost of the work needs to be levied against the property. So that's what the ask is tonight, to conduct a the public hearing, and then adopt the resolution, which will allow us to levy the costs against the property. I can take any questions.
Questions for Mr. Brown at this point in time? All right, stand by, Mr. Brown. All right, this is a public hearing matter. I'm going to open it up for public testimony or comment. If there's anyone in the audience who wishes to come forward with regard to this matter and testify, please feel free to come forward at this time. Seeing no one coming forward, hearing nothing from the audience, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So, second.
We had a motion and second to close the public hearing. Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say nay. Carried. And now, is there a motion to certify this special levy on this particular property, embodied in Resolution 2017-61?
So moved.
Got a motion and a second to pass Resolution 2017-61. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say nay. Carried. Next matter, Director Teague has this particular matter, and it involves conditional use permit for one of our spiritual centers. Director Teague.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. Before you is a conditional use permit request. This is a very unique site. The property is located on the far west end of town along Highway 169. This graphic okay, sorry about that. This property, it's unique in that the city's municipal boundary line runs right through the middle of the building. The green line indicated on the screen is the municipal boundary line. So the majority of the building's located in the city of Edina, but a portion of it is located in the city of Eden Prairie. So look at the building. You can see there's a building in front of it toward Washington Avenue. The property is currently zoned industrial, planned PID, planned industrial district. Churches are considered a conditionally permitted use within our industrial zoning district. What the applicants are proposing here is to remodel a small portion of this building for their church. The area that's highlighted in red on the screen, that's the portion of the building that would be remodeled. It has a seating capacity of about 144 seats. The church itself has 80 members. They hold their services on Sunday mornings and Wednesday evenings. To give you a comparison, you may recall about a year ago on Bush Lake Road, we had a similar request for a church to remodel existing office warehouse space. That church, just to give you a size comparison, if you recall, was about double the size of this. That was a 200-member church with a 360 seating capacity maximum. That church has been in operation at that site, and we haven't had any problems. That one was more of a shared parking arrangement where they were quite a bit short parked compared to code. This one, we're nearly code compliant if all of the uses were happening at the same time. So again, this request requires a conditional use permit. All of our minimum zoning standards, the existing building meets our setbacks. If we were to, so based on the maximum seating, 48 parking stalls are required. The site has 102 on the site. So if all of the offices and industrial uses were taking place at the same time, the maximum number of parking that's needed on the site is 109 spaces. So we're really close to code compliant in regard to parking. That last project, we had a traffic and parking study done by WSB because of the short parked situation. This one, we didn't have the full-blown study, but I did have a conversation with WSB who conducted that study, and we went through the parameters, and they didn't find that there would be any issues here with that shared parking, with that small number of parking spaces being short. So with that, in going through our conditional use permit criteria, staff and the Planning Commission believe that all of our conditional use permit criteria is met. There wouldn't be any adverse impacts to facilities, utilities, in terms of the traffic. There should be adequate parking. And again, it conforms to all of our minimum ordinance requirements. It's consistent with our comprehensive plan in that it is a conditionally permitted use. So with that, staff and the Planning Commission are recommending approval of the conditional use permit for the church to occupy this space. With that, I can stand for any questions that you may have.
Questions for Director Teague at this point in time? Anyone? All right. No, I have none either. Thank you, Director Teague. We have the proponents here this evening, I believe. Want to make a presentation? Have you discussed timing with them, Director Teague?
I did not, but their presentation at the Planning Commission, very short, maybe 5 minutes.
All right, very good. Folks here from the church? Yes, please come forward. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Sam Gidenji. I am one of the leaders from Jesus Celebration Center.
And Sam, would you give us the address for the center?
It is on Washington. I don't remember.
No, I didn't mean to put you in an awkward spot. It's 6879 Washington Avenue, and that's the address for the church.
Yes.
All right.
We don't have a presentation per se, but tonight I am accompanied with a few members from our congregation. I am one of the leaders from this church, and I just wanted to say that thank you for having us tonight, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have for me.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Anybody have questions? Member Fisher?
My only question would be, are you located somewhere else right now, or is this the first location you'll actually have?
So right now we are meeting in a school, in a middle school in Bloomington, Valley View Middle School.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Anyone else? All right, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that wishes to testify regarding this matter? It's we're in the public hearing phase of this particular issue. Oh, it's open for public testimony. Anyone else wish to come forward and testify? All right, seeing no one coming forward and hearing nothing from the audience, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second?
Got a motion second to close the public hearing. Discussion. All those in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say nay. Carried. Is there a motion for the council to approve a conditional use permit for the Jesus Celebration Center?
So
based
moved.
on the staff findings and subject to the staff conditions?
Second.
All right. Got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Carried. Welcome.
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 Good luck
to
with
our
everything.
city.
Thank you.
The next matter in front of us this evening from a public hearing standpoint is a preliminary review of a proposed project called Great Oaks, 5109 through 25 West 49th Street. Director Teague has this matter as well.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Members of the okay, we'll use this again, sorry. Before you is a request for this is actually a zoning ordinance amendment to an existing PUD development that never was constructed. So the property that we're looking at is just on the west side of Highway 100 behind the large sound wall that was recently constructed. The site contains an existing single-family home and a couple of apartment buildings. So there's 10 units total on the site today. As many of you probably recall, back in 2013, the site was rezoned to its current PUD zoning status. We did a comprehensive plan amendment where we increased the density allowed on this site. This was low-density attached residential, and we increased the density to medium density, which allows for up to 12 units per acre. So along with that comprehensive plan amendment, as part of the PUD, we approved, or the city approved, a specific development plan for the site. That included a 16-unit attached townhome project that you see on the screen. One of the main features of the project was all of the sidewalk and pedestrian connections. Along 49th Street and along the west side of the lot line, a sidewalk was intended to connect up to Vernon Avenue, and this would be the pedestrian access into the Grandview district. So again, you can see the townhomes along the back and along the front, 16 units in all. A quick look at what those were to look like. They needed to sell 12 units before they built one, and actually none of the units sold. So the project never happened. The request before you this evening is a zoning ordinance amendment to that PUD district to essentially establish a new site plan with that project. So in a sense, it's a rezoning. So the preliminary site plan review and preliminary plat. The applicant did go through the sketch plan process. You may recall a few months back, the plan on the screen, it was the sketch plan. As you see, a main feature of that project was this green promenade that ran through the middle of the site, and again to provide that pedestrian connection from the neighborhood to the north up to Vernon Avenue. This project would have required a comprehensive plan amendment to high-density residential. This was 27 units, 27 units in total, so that would cross into the high-density range. Some of the concerns that were expressed at that time, in particular, was the location of the east building to the single-family home to the east. This is a look at that plan. You can see there was a 25-foot separation as proposed at sketch plan. So the applicant has made a number of revisions to the plan since the sketch. They've reduced the number of units by 10, so they now fit with our current comprehensive plan as a medium-density development, 17 units total. That west building has been replaced with detached units, and again, that's how they accommodated the decrease in density. They have shifted that east building away from the single-family home. There's now a 30-foot separation, and they've provided some mature landscaping that would provide a buffer between the two, and we'll take a look at that. Another one of the more significant features is the elimination of that pedestrian connection, and that's due to that giant sound wall that was constructed. We knew it was coming, we just didn't quite realize the size and mass of it. MnDOT had always indicated that we could essentially create an opening in the wall to still provide that pedestrian connection. So we've shared that information. The applicant knew that when we went through sketch plan, but again, we didn't quite realize the height and magnitude of that wall that sits out there today. So they would like to not construct that pedestrian connection. Staff and the Planning Commission, however, are still recommending that that connection be made. So the project itself, again, access provided off 49th Street. A traffic study was done by Wenken Associates. Jared Ward is here this evening to answer any questions in regard to the traffic study, but we're only adding 7 units here to what's existing. So the study concludes that there's no negative impact to the roadway system, no upgrades would be needed as a result of this project. So just to quickly take you through the project, and the applicant will go into more detail description of the buildings. So here's an aerial view. You can see the larger building on the right-hand side. So there's the sound wall. The buildings would sit just above. Another look from Vernon. So this would be a view from 49th Street looking into the development. Along 49th, you can see the proximity to the single-family home. Looking across to the north on 49th. So in terms of some of the site plan specifics, based on our tree ordinance, the 25 overstory trees are proposed here. They have a quite aggressive landscape plan that's proposed 65 overstory trees, so well in excess of our code requirements. City engineer has reviewed the grading drainage plans, found them acceptable. It would be contingent on watershed district approval. Again, staff and the Planning Commission are recommending that sidewalk connection, because it was key to our previous approvals, and we do want to try to provide that pedestrian connection to the neighborhood to the north up to Grandview, are recommending that sidewalk do go in. One thing I wanted to mention, that MnDOT is proposing to upgrade the bridge here on Vernon Avenue. So that might be an opportunity to provide a more comfortable sidewalk along the north there. So we feel that providing that pedestrian connection could be important and lead to that potential expanded sidewalk there across that bridge. Preliminary plat is proposed. So again, there's 7 new units. Park dedication would be required. That would be required at the time of final plat. In terms of comparing some of the setback requirements to the existing or the PUD that was approved but never built. As noted on the screen, this project, the structures are a little bit closer to the perimeter, perimeter lot lines, 14 feet and 5 feet from 49th Street, 3 feet from Vernon. Again, they're pushing the southern building right up close to the sound wall. And building coverage, and of course the height of the structure. This is 3.5 stories and 54 feet, so it is taller than the previously approved plan. In terms of the setback, staff was comfortable with the proposed setbacks, given the adjacent land uses. So along 49th, there is a large right-of-way, so there is about a 15-foot green space. Note that in the engineering memo, we're recommending a boulevard-style sidewalk along 49th Street to, again, provide a more comfortable sidewalk, but there's plenty of right-of-way there to accommodate that. We've got the railroad tracks to the west, so pulling the buildings up closer to the railroad, didn't see an issue with that. And again, the sound wall along the south lot line, and they have shifted the building here. You can kind of see the slight angle, so there's a 30-foot separation, and they're proposing 12 to 18-foot evergreen trees along that east lot line. So primary issue is the proposed amendment to the PUD reasonable to develop the site. Both staff and the Planning Commission are recommending approval. We believe that the project meets our PUD criteria, creates a more efficient, creative use of the land. Again, it's medium density, going from single family to medium density into the more dense development in the Grandview area. We do believe that the inclusion of that north-south sidewalk is important to the site. Again, this is consistent with the comprehensive plan with the medium density. Existing roadways would support the project, and we were comfortable with the setbacks as proposed. There was some discussion in particular at the Planning Commission about some concerns about the setback, especially on 49th Street, but ultimately the Planning Commission is recommending approval. It was a 5-2 vote. So with that, staff and the Planning Commission are recommending approval, subject to the findings and conditions that are outlined in your approving resolution this evening. With that, I can stand for any questions that you may have.
Questions for Director Teague at this point in time? Member Fisher?
So, Mr. Teague, did you say the Planning Commission still wants the pedestrian walk through the site?
Correct.
Okay.
Member Staunton?
So how does the opening work? Is it a door with a knob? Does it swing out into the sidewalk? Does it swing in to the hillside? Is it sliding? Is it remote control? What are we doing here?
I'll ask for Director Milner to help me with this one, but they have provided some options on how it can be accommodated, and I believe he's outlined that in his review memo.
Councilmember Staunton, we've had verbal discussions with MnDOT. I have correspondence with them that we can create openings in the wall. There's opportunities to get creative and let the applicant decide how to do that, but they could go between the poles, it's 8 feet. So they can go 8 feet wide and decide how high. They could do multiple openings. They could open it all the way to the top of the wall, so it's open to the sky in multiple locations. The benefit of the wall is directly related to their property for the noise blockage, so they can decide how much of that they wish to open for the pedestrian experience.
And it's just cutting a opening and
They're wood
there's no
slabs.
closing it and...
You don't have to open and close. They'd be open all the time.
All right.
Yep. So no doors, no latches.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Other questions for Director Teague at this point in time? All right, I see the proponents here. Invite them to come forward and make their presentation.
Good evening, Mayor Hovland, members of the council. My name is Rob Miller with TE Miller Development. My address is 300 Prairie Center Drive, Eden Prairie, 55344. And I'm one of the developers of the project along with my partners at Great Oaks. Today, the project architect, Dan UNESCO with DIEP, and the project landscape architect, Jason Ane, are going to present the plan. And would just ask for your support of the project because it's in line with the comprehensive plan and supported by city staff and the Planning Commission. And the project's been supported by the neighborhood. We've received a lot of feedback from neighbors last fall and this April when we went in front of the neighborhood that this project is a welcome addition, upscale addition to the neighborhood. With that, I'm going to get the media ready for Architect Dan. Take it away, Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Good evening.
Well, good evening. My name is Dan Ionescu. I'm an architect and a town planner from San Francisco Bay Area. I've been blessed to work here several other projects in Minneapolis, but it's first time in front of you in Edina. We need just one moment to bring in the project presentation, which will be relatively short. I'll try to move quite fast through it. After we had first step last year with the neighborhood and with Planning Commission and you, we got to this situation in which we started to design the project. As you can see on your screen, the lighter area is the site that the project is located, and we have the road on the outside, the sound wall, and the 49th Street at the top. This is a very nice site in Edina, in a very quiet neighborhood that I really enjoyed it, how it is hidden away in a way, and it's an enclave, and a lot of things to inspire a town planner and architect to do there. But one thing that surprised me looking at it in details, it's actually, this is a very warped site. It's quite, has difficult slopes, and if you can see, on the east side we have just about 10-foot drop. On the west side within our property only we have 20-foot drop, and if we take from the sidewalk on Vernon Avenue to 49th, it's 30-foot drop. I try to be conservative and show real numbers. And I'm showing you this because it's important. Well, there were some discussions why I kept the east building in the east position where it is today. And I need to explain and to share with you how we try to work on various sites. We're the type of town planners and architects that we try to be as light on the land as possible. Also, by the same token, we try to do the best spaces for the future users that will be there, either residents or office workers or schools or whatever they are. Then it's a balance that is really important to us to provide the best spaces for people, but with minimum destruction of the land. I don't like to force things on the land. And as I was working on this project, the east side, it's a natural to just nestle the garage in the ground, make it disappear, because I'm not a fan of showing garage and parking lots. I prefer to show landscaping and people's homes and people's offices or schools. And then it was just natural to hide the garage underground. And on the west side, where we had this much more difficult drop, I prefer to create in the nature that already is there, stair steps, platforms, to put homes that are on one level. Very important, if you try to, I want you to know that I tried to put it on the west side, and in the previous design I had that, but we never got to this level to be approved. The west building would be imposing. You see, having a garage that is a concrete garage, you cannot stair step it. It is what it is. It's a big garage, it's a big box. And having such a drop, if I put it at the street level, the residences at the back are underground. And I mean literally underground. It doesn't work. If I take the garage and push it up, two things happen. The garage becomes extremely visible. I have a ramp like this, which I have to go up 10 feet at least. And it's really not in residential character to have a big, long ramp, to see the garage at the second level, to have units in the south side out of the ground. Then the reason why this happened this way are simply the grades, the geology, how it happened there, and the fact that I really prefer to be the softest, to have the softest touch on the land. There are no other reasons. It's just this created also nice platforms, stepping down, for all the residences, the single-family homes, to have south elevation. All rooms in those homes have south elevations. Anyway, this is a landscape plan. Here we have the landscape architect. Will present you later. I put this drawing at the beginning because it's the nicest out of the whole presentation. We'll get back to it. Here you see the garage. You see the ground, as I was telling you, how we are underground, how we come up with the buildings of the ground. That would be the main level. I want to mention something very important. Our 4 residences on the west side have generally the same volumetry. You will see it a little bit later. But they actually will vary. They could be 2 levels or 1 level. But they will have the same general roofs. In other words, the bulk, the volume of the buildings will be very, very, very similar, and you'll see the differences are minor in really if they are 2-story or 1-story. And we want this to offer to the market a more flexible set of choices to be as attractive as possible. And here you see the main street, the 49th, and we come out with our road, which again, we prefer to do it both just to make it more relaxed, more flowing with the grades and with what we do here. The building, the 3-story building, has an underground garage, and please know that I'm embracing the garage completely with soil in such a way that the only thing that you see from 49th is the garage door. That's it. This is the entry level, with entry from our street. 4 units per floor. All units are corner units. All units have sun. I work in other climates, northern climates in other places, and sun is very important. And the 3rd floor, it's a penthouse level, which has somewhat larger units, and hidden in the attics, in the roofs, some areas for maybe, since we are addressing these residential units for people kind of our age, older people that are very active with children and grandchildren, we have a thought and a set of plans that the upper level is for the children and grandchildren. And otherwise, we live on the one level. And we've tried in other places. They work very, very well. There are more and more baby boomers like us, which are very active. And there is a very good market in this field. Here, very quickly through the plans, I'm not going to get in details. They're very pleasant, 16 to 1,800 square feet. Very livable. And the upstairs, the penthouses. Here we have the internal elevation. Again, I'm trying to stay away from buildings which are very boxy. Nothing wrong with boxy buildings, but I prefer buildings which touch the ground in a softer way, and they step, and they offer a more pleasant connection with the ground and with the grades around. And that's why the building is stair-stepping, and we have just some lofts in the very top center, hidden, but very attractive for the people living there, with cathedral ceilings and lofts looking down and a lot of activity. This is I mentioned to you the access and the visibility of the garage from the 49th. All you see is the garage door, and you should know that you are there, because even that one is going to be hidden with very nice landscaping. And but you can see how it feels, and it's just broken down. And this is our access looking up on our street. There is single-family homes on the right side, the 3-story building, condominium building on the left. Here you see the 3-story building again cascading down towards the residential neighborhood. Here you see the corner looking towards our property. The top left photograph, it's existing situation today. And the building that we're proposing, it's how it will look when built. Here are the residential units in the single-family homes. And I want you to know that those 4 units that I mentioned a few minutes earlier, the plans, the ground level plans are similar. There are just 1 stair extra to go upstairs if they change to go upstairs, and they have 2 stories. Here you see the elevations of the single stories. Here you see, notice the stair just kind of in the middle of the plan, and how we have an upstairs at the back of the house, at the rear of the house. And you can see the volume is the same as the previous one, but we have some expression of some hips in the left side of the house. All 4 elevations. And we will have different elevation at the street. Well, they'll be the same family. They will be, we will not do two the same. We feel that this variety will really help create a very nice sense of neighborhood, and then it will be together also with the 3-story building. And here is the approach. We did study this in 3D, looked at various angles all the time. And as this will be 49th, you go to on 49th, as you are right on the railroad tracks right now. And this is how you would see the first single-family home. And here it's a view from the Vernon Avenue. You can see the play of roofs. And note on the left side, the first and second building far away are 2-story. The third and fourth building far away are 2 stories. The first and second buildings are 1 story, and the difference is just minimal. The volume, they are definitely in the same family. We do have a 5th building in the middle, because I need to say that I really tried to take out the sound out of the composition of this place, because it felt really overwhelming. And I wanted to create an enclave for the whole neighborhood, and also these residents that will live here, that it's oriented towards the neighborhood and not oriented towards the wall. I recognize that we have the unit number 4 and unit number 5 in relation with the wall, also the short end of the 3-story in relation with the wall, but that's where this gentleman here will take care to make a very nice space. And slowly, in time, the trees will mature, the landscaping will mature, and it will be quite pleasant, hopefully. But it was an effort to try to really make this space residential, make this area part of the neighborhood, be a pleasant first step stepping into the neighborhood, and adding value and pride to everybody there. And this is the view coming from the lobby of the 3-story building. You can see the 1-story residences, or actually 2-story as well, but you don't realize that across the street on the west side. And these are the views from Vernon Avenue. And I'll be here answering any questions you may have, but now Mr. Jason Aune will present his beautiful drawing and concept on what we're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Just to build on what...
Would you reintroduce yourself too, please?
I'm sorry. My name is Jason Aune of Aune Fernandez Landscape Architects, a member of the project team. Just to build on what Dan had said, is the title of this project is Villas. So what we wanted to do with the landscape is really make this a villa theme. So we're planting significant amounts of plant material and significant size of plant material. Some of the trees are up to 4-inch caliber right away. Another significant feature is the evergreens on the east, between the Smith's house and the larger building. We'll be planting 18-foot spaded trees. The composition, like Dan said, is to make it more neighborhood friendly. So there's a lot of fall color, evergreens, spring blooms. So we really wanted to make this feel as part of the neighborhood with the composition of the landscape and the composition of the buildings. And then take into consideration some of the exterior views, screening the screen wall from the residences on the south, also screening the Smiths on the east. And I think with that, I'll turn it back over to Rob. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aune. Mr. Miller?
Yes, I just wanted to address a couple of specific concerns that have come up with staff, the neighborhood and planning commission as we've gone through the approvals process. The first is the is creating a pedestrian path through our site and a penetration in the wall, which we don't think makes sense on our site for a number of reasons. One, there's already 2 pedestrian paths in the neighborhood. One that goes up Brookside Avenue to Vernon, which is a city sidewalk, and also there's a trail on the west side of the railroad tracks that takes residents up to Vernon. A hole in the wall also creates some safety issues for the neighborhood, and no one will use it because no one wants to walk along Vernon Avenue next to a sound wall and a sidewalk with no boulevard. Another issue that came up is some commissions were asking if we could flip the condos and the single-family homes on the site, which doesn't work for a number of reasons. One is the topography of the land, as Dan pointed out earlier. Also, if we put the single-family homes on the east side of the site, we would have homes with tuck-under garages because of the topography, which is just not a marketable product and not an attractive product. As Director Teague mentioned earlier, that a project similar to that was proposed on the site and none of the units sold. Then also wanted to address the condo building's proximity to the single-family home on the east side of the project. As Director Teague noted, we have extended that setback from 25 feet to 30 feet from the previous plan. There are no homes on the, or there are no windows on the west side of the Smith home, which means the privacy issues aren't going to be as severe. And as Mr. Ane mentioned, we have several very large trees that we're planting to create a buffer between our project and the neighboring home. And there are only 2 units that will really have views of that backyard anyways, and those are the units on the 2nd and 3rd floor in the southeast corner of the building. Another issue that came up is people were asking about House 5 and saying that it potentially didn't belong. We think it's appropriate because it covers up the sound wall. We think it looks pleasant at the top of the hill from 49th, and it's just a nice buffer for that sound wall. So those are some specific items that came up along the way. And with that, if you have any questions for our team.
Sure. Let me see about council members. Member Fisher, any questions?
You know, I don't really have any questions. I have some thoughts, but I think I'll save those. But I'm just trying to think so you're proposing no pedestrian walk on the site, and in the sound in terms of the planting in front of the sound wall, are you proposing to do anything on the wall? Can you do that? Could it be a great ivy kind of location?
Councilmember Fisher, we can, with MnDOT permission, we can plant, I think, on the wall or within that buffer zone of the wall.
Can you get it to go to the other side?
We can try.
Help us, please. I don't have any.
All right. Anyone else for the proponent at this point in time?
Oh, I can wait.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Just stand by. We're going to open the matter up for public testimony. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to come forward and comment regarding this proposed preliminary approval? Anyone? Is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second. Got a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Discussion. All those in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say nay. Carried. I'm going to go back then to Member Fisher. You said you had some comments, and I'll let you lead off.
Thank you. I think, so I understand, and I was, part of a group that worked in the Grandview area for a number of years, and pedestrian connections are a key part of the Grandview area, and we wanted to connect this neighborhood to the north with Grandview. So it made perfect sense, and I wasn't around when some of these iterations, there have been a lot of iterations on this site, by the way, but a number of them that, all of them included some sort of pedestrian connection. I look at this, and I'm still horrified by this wall, by the way. This is just nothing we ever imagined, at least I ever imagined, but it's here now. And I sort of equate this to so we're still chasing an old idea that is effectively dead. And I don't think you take a sound wall and poke holes in it so you can step out onto a sidewalk right on a busy street. I think it does create security concerns. So now you create a hole that someone can get back behind and then get back out. It just doesn't feel right. So I think we have to rethink our vision of that pedestrian experience. And I believe that it might be a little further of a trip, but I think it's better to use the sidewalks we have or even the informal path up on the west side of the railroad track. I think is a better solution for the neighborhood at this point, unless we can go out and take this wall down, but I don't think that's in the cards. My other, and I should say, I actually like this development proposal. I think it feels right. If I had a concern, it's that, we do have the larger building on the east side, but the topography really, I think, drives that. And to force it another way doesn't feel like it makes sense to me. Do I wish it could be a little further away from the Smith House? Yes, but I think the factors with the Smith House, that they don't have windows on the west side, and that we can do significant planting there, and that's what's being proposed. I mean, this is significant planting, and those are big trees, which shows some real attempts to kind of make that situation as good as it can be. So, in general, I think this, we've seen a lot of iterations. I think this is probably the best one we've seen that kind of resolves all of the problems, all of the opportunities that we've talked about over the years. So I'm in favor of it, and I don't think we should force the pedestrian walk through this site.
All right. Member Brindle, your comments?
All right, thank you. I did read the letter from Mr. Smith and did consider how would this flip so that his home would be adjacent to the detached homes, and frankly, I don't know how you'd do that. I think the way that the homes are set up on this parcel it fits the parcel well, and where you've got on the west, you've got the most room, and therefore you can nestle in the detached homes and make them fit and complement one another. And then where you have less space, you can place the larger building, and it's not even exactly straight, so it just sits in there nicely. And I appreciate the architect's description and care with trying to make it fit and be as really artistic as it can be. I really think it's wonderful, frankly. So looking at the center drive, it is a 16-foot drop from when you enter from 49th Street up to the back of House 5, which is a pretty significant drop. And so I'm thinking about rainwater and heavy rain and a way to capture some of that water before it gets to the street. So looking at maybe some curb cuts, if you will, to draw some of that water into rain gardens or something that would soften the curb on the sides and use that water rather than just let it all go down to 49th Street, because that's quite a bit of a slope from 943 elevation to 927. So I really would like to see some capturing of rainwater there. Let's see. And then House 5, kind of almost right up against that sound wall. So really, they are not going to have much light or use of the back of that home. So if there's a way to give them some greenery back there, I think it would be really nice. So, but a really nice job on fitting this into this property. I did hear from some residents in the neighborhood, and by and large, the neighborhood is very much in favor of this. So nice job. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Stewart?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Member Brindle referred to the letter from Mr. Smith, the neighbor. The suggestion he had made was that the site be, or the buildings on the site be flip-flopped so that the single-family residences were to the east and the larger building to the west. I appreciated Mr. Ionesco explaining his reasons for why he designed it the way he did, and I found the explanation compelling. So thank you for doing that. I was a little open-minded as we came in tonight, and I think I understand the vision that you have, and I thank you for explaining that. I also think the landscaping here is very important. So, Mr. Auni, I think that row of trees on the eastern boundary will be important. I agree with Member Brindle that if we can do some things along the back, along the wall behind House 5 in particular, I think that would help sort of enhance the whole thing. For the developers, I thank you for engaging with people in the neighborhood. It sounds like there has been really good dialogue between your group and the people who are in the neighborhood, and I think there's been, for the most part, a healthy embracing of the concept. So that's good. I wasn't sure about the walkway. I found Member Fisher's suggestion, I thought that was a good argument, that this has changed that wall, and I agree, I hate the wall. I particularly hate it moving as far west as it did. I think it was good to have it along the highway. I'm just not sure it had to go so far west. And, but I do think it changes the equation. It's a new set of principles. I don't think we ought to force it here. Mr. Teague mentioned that there may be a chance when we redo the bridge to maybe create a pathway that would get up to the bridge from the area. I don't know if there's enough room in that railroad right away or something to do that, but it's worth exploring, I suppose, in the future. And then finally, rainwater runoff, I think was mentioned by Member Brindle, that I think it is important to manage the rainwater in this area on the site. I think all of the elevations that were described create some challenges in that regard, and I hope you'll give it really good attention as the plans unfold, both to capture the rainwater coming off the non-porous surfaces, but to consider ways that you can increase the number of porous surfaces and do some things to effectively take advantage of the rainwater. So on the whole, I support the concept, I support the project, and I congratulate you for the work with some real challenges in the site. So thank you.
Thank you, Member Stewart. Member Staunton?
So I was on the Planning Commission when this first, I can remember the first iteration of this coming forward that had 96 units on this site. And we said, no, that's not going to work. And the neighbors said, no, that's not going to work. And then, as Mr. Teague pointed out, we had a project that we approved, we thought would move forward, and in the marketplace it just fell flat because it wasn't single-level living. And then we've had other travails as well, including kind of having a very nice design that included this pathway to get up to Vernon and start to think about how it could connect with the Grandview area, and then the wall extended further than we thought it was going to extend. So it's somewhat amazing that it keeps, the fact that it keeps persisting says there's a need. And so I'm pleased that you've continued to persist, and I think over time we've gotten to the right place. I think it's a right mix. I agree with my colleagues that it's time to give up the ghost on making the pedestrian access happen there. I'm actually very concerned about the security issues, that it creates a hiding place right behind the wall and you can get in and out, and it's the backyards of those homes that would be down there. So perhaps when the bridge is redone, maybe there's something we can do on the west side with the right-of-way or with the railroad. And I agree with everything that's been said about the topography and the challenges that go along with that, and it looks to me like you're doing the right landscaping, and I think it's going to be a terrific improvement to the neighborhood, so I'm all in favor.
Thank you, Member Staunton. I concur with my colleagues regarding the hole in the wall. I guess we're the anti-hole in the wall gang. So, if there's a provision that requires that there be a sidewalk in front of the new development that connects into the sidewalk on Brookside, that would be important. And I don't remember, I thought you said there was a sidewalk issue in front of the development itself.
They are proposing sidewalk along 49th, and some of the plans, it was behind the curb, so we just want to make sure it's boulevard-style sidewalk.
All right, well, and that's appropriate. So I think that's a very important link to Brookside, which then causes a person to get on that sidewalk, go up around the Holiday Station. It might take them a couple more minutes to get over where they want to go, but I think it's a more appropriate way to be traveling on foot. I like the density at 12 units per acre. I think you've done some pretty creative work to get it to work this way, and I concur with my colleagues that based on topography, you can't switch the buildings, so moving the west buildings east and the east building to the west. It just doesn't work, and make the project feel like it fits in the neighborhood, because it's a very tranquil little spot right down there in the middle of a urban area. It's very close to significant traffic volumes and commercial areas, and it just is a little peaceful area. Very, very special place. One of the conditions that came forward in the resolution, the last one, was that there be compliance with the Wink traffic study recommendations. The one recommendation I saw was that we do some work up at Vernon and Interlochen. And that's not even next to this project, so I'm not sure exactly what the conditions would be or recommendations that would be applicable to this particular project. And because if that's the condition we're talking about, which is what I saw in your report, that's remote to this site and has nothing to do with this site, and I'd remove that condition. So other than that, I thought the conditions were fine. I guess I was curious as to the park dedication fee, because I was thinking we were actually creating 17 new units here. I know it's a net new 7, but I was hoping some way you could do the math in a way where the new units total of 17 times 5,000 would be the appropriate number. But I understand I'm sure you've done your calculations properly, so for the park dedication fee. So other than that, I think the conditions all seem appropriate to me. I would get rid of condition number 10. And I think it's the kind of project that's, as Member Brindle said, supported by the neighborhood. I got a call from Mr. Michael Beck from the neighborhood this afternoon. He said, make sure you mention, I'm a 30-year resident, and I love this project, and I look forward to having it in the neighborhood. And I think Mr. Beck called many of the rest of you as well. So, Mr. Beck, true to my word, I mentioned that you're fully in support of this particular project as a long-term resident. So I would support it as well. I don't know if anybody else has thoughts about any of the conditions that are embodied in that particular resolution. They all seem, other than the number 10, seem appropriate to me.
Mr. Mayor, do we have to, would the pedestrian connection, I think it's inherent in, let's see, would it be the?
We could ask Mr. Director Teague.
Yeah, I would recommend that you strike number 10 and replace it with sidewalk connection to Vernon shall not be required.
All right. Maybe it's direct sidewalk or something, because ultimately it does get to Vernon.
I'm making that change. Member Fisher, direct sidewalk connection to Vernon Avenue shall not be required. All right, with that, we by simple majority vote need a resolution to approve the preliminary site plan. It's ordinance, first reading, ordinance 2017-06, approving preliminary rezoning. We've got two steps here, I guess, Director Teague. The resolution itself could be handled on a simple majority vote, and then the ordinance, first reading on a roll call.
Or you could do them together.
As a roll
Both
call.
actions just require 3 votes.
Okay. If someone wanted to move both the resolution with the change that we made and the ordinance, and we'll do it by roll call, we can do
moved.
that.
Second.
And did you want a waiver of second reading, Director?
No, we would come back with the final rezoning as part of that second reading. And we could do the final plat at that time as well.
Okay. We've got a motion and a second to adopt Resolution 2017-62 with the changes made with respect to Condition 10. And then we have Ordinance 2017-06. We're going to do a roll call vote on both these matters. Ms. Tim, roll call, please.
Member Brindle?
Aye.
Member Fisher?
Aye.
Member Staunton?
Aye.
Member Stewart?
Aye.
Mayor Huff.
Aye. Thank you, gentlemen. Excellent project. We look forward to working with you as we get towards final on this. Our final public hearing matter this evening involves the proposed establishment of a tax increment financing district around 50th and France, and Mr. Neuendorf, our Economic Development Director, has this along with Nick Anhut of Ehlers and Associates and our, well, I don't want to get too laudatory, but our excellent advisor from Dorsey and Whitney and our fellow resident, Jay Lindgren. That is our team to make this presentation. Mr. Neuendorf, welcome.
Yes, thank you very much. As you had mentioned, we're here to have a public hearing about the use of tax increment financing over at 50th and France. This proposal is in line with our Market Street redevelopment that we chatted about earlier this evening, and it secured its zoning approvals pending many conditions that we're working on over the next weeks and months. I have a brief presentation to share, and as you mentioned, after we're finished with the presentation, we have Nick Anhut from Ehlers, Jay Lindgren from Dorsey and Whitney to answer any questions and fill in any blanks that might be out there.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Neuendorf.
All right, great. So this presentation is similar to others that I've given in past years when we consider the use of tax increment financing in the community. For this particular presentation, I wanted to spend a few minutes looking at the history of 50th and France before we get into the meat of the financing proposal. As we all know, 50th and France is a district that's well-loved, well-enjoyed by Edina residents as well as many people throughout the Twin Cities region. It's a place that is something special. And that's something that we're very aware of and want to do, want to make sure that we can keep that spirit. But historically, looking back, there's some of us in the community might remember the days when there was a single store on the corner and streetcar lines that crisscrossed it. There was a combination of one-story buildings and a couple two-story buildings, which were probably a big thing back in the 1930s. The 40s and 50s is when the district really started to hit its retail stride. The Ben Franklin has been replaced by Steel Fitness and Fringe. The Bellison sign is still there at a little bit different location, but that's shown here in the early 50s. There was the Edina Bowling Center on France Avenue that some may remember, some may not. And the Edina Theater was a small Art Deco single-screen theater that had air conditioning, a huge amenity back in the day. In the late 60s, the city started to get proactive in looking at that district, recognizing that there needed to be some improvements to the area to make it sustainable for the next generation. So that's when the road went in. The 51st Street had not been there before, so that went in the late 60s, and the city made its first major investment in that south parking ramp. The effort to sustain 50th and France for another term hit another stride in the mid-1970s when the city created a housing and redevelopment authority, worked with the existing businesses and other stakeholders to really refine the charm and create those pedestrian byways that so many people enjoy at 50th and France. In the mid-70s, Edina created its first tax increment financing district called 50th and France District Number 1. That was the financing source to help fund the new parking structure, which is the subject of tonight's conversation. The center ramp was built in 1976, funded with TIF, as well as assessments levied upon all the business owners at 50th and France. This image shows the extent of the TIF district. It was 18 acres. It encompassed the entire Edina half of 50th and France. From a different perspective, this is a map from, I believe, 1980 that shows in the red box on the top the brand new center ramp that had been opened. It also shows prominently the 4 gas stations, service stations, curb cuts, and drive-through restaurants that were available for your shopping and gas filling enjoyment at 50th and France. Quite a bit different than what we see today. In the early 1980s, those gas stations were replaced. The Henley condominiums, a new 3-story building with underground parking was created. The Regency condominiums. And the Edina Theater was essentially torn down and rebuilt. They preserved the facade and the sign and the small retail shops on the front, but the entire back of it was rebuilt to be converted from a single-screen, small-town theater to a 4-plex, which was a big deal in 1988. So again, a lot of change. In the early 2000s, the Haugland companies removed a number of small businesses at the intersection of 50th and France to build the 5,000 France condominiums. That's a 4-story building with underground parking for the residents and restaurants and retail on the first floor. So those phases of history really show the changes that happen incrementally at 50th and France. And over the last decade, we've been positioning for the next chapter of what that might look like. And that's the subject of the discussions that we've had here this evening. When 2 properties became available, when the business owners were looking to close those businesses and sell and move on with other ventures in their lives, the Housing and Redevelopment Authority took the opportunity. We acquired 2 properties that were outdated, functionally obsolete. They met various substandard requirements, and they were, I think everyone could agree that they were definitely in need of rehab or redevelopment or just downright reconstruction. So the Housing Authority rose to the challenge and assembled those projects, or those properties. And there was a sizable investment. One of the parcels cost about $2.6 million. The other one cost about $1.5 million. So there's a significant investment from the community to make that happen. Last year, we wanted to turn the corner and look forward again. We issued the request for proposal to the private sector to see what kind of creative ideas we could garner to reconstruct that portion of 49th and a half Street. In 2011, 2012, we had thought about reskinning the parking structures, making them look nicer. We recognized that shoppers and diners have other options than Edina, and there were other districts in the southwest suburbs and west suburbs that were very attractive to consumers, and we were not keeping up. After studying that proposal to beautify the ramps, I think the overall consensus was that that was not money well spent. The phrase of putting lipstick on the pig came up at many different meetings, and we decided rather than just building more parking, we really needed to make street life and add vitality and add commercial spaces to create a district that people went to not just because they had a fancy parking garage. They go to the district to shop or to eat or to hang out with their family and friends. Some might drive, some might walk. So when we issued the request for proposals back last August, that was really the intention, to see what kind of creative ideas we could inspire. Ultimately, we interviewed 3 different development teams, and in December of 2016, we selected the team of Buell Investors and Saturday Properties, feeling that they had truly the spirit of what we were aiming for in mind with their proposal. And the final site plan that was approved a couple hours ago really embodied what that outcome could look like. So when it comes to the use of tax increment financing and getting involved in the community, I pulled several excerpts from our Vision Edina document to kind of put this in context. But certainly without that, or throughout that document, there's comments about how we're a future-oriented community. We're not looking necessarily only to the past. We're looking to the future, certainly respectful and proud of our past, but looking ahead, looking forward to changes. Creating areas that combine living and working in the same environment. So a lot of these ideals that are in the Vision Edina document, we feel are brought forward in this proposal. The public hearing this evening is about tax increment financing. And oftentimes we get a lot of questions about what is TIF, what isn't TIF, I don't get it. So in a nutshell, and certainly we can go into further depth if you like, but tax increment financing is a public finance tool. It's been around since the early 70s. It's used throughout the United States. It is heavily regulated by Minnesota statute, state laws that get tweaked every year as we learn a little bit more and figure out better ways to do it. But essentially, it uses growth in our tax base to fund either private investment or public infrastructure. And in Edina, we have used it successfully. We've used it pretty sparingly, but we've used it with great success. So there's 3 specific steps when a community uses tax increment financing. Tonight we'll talk about step number 1, which is nothing more than creating the district. Basically drawing boundaries on the map and establishing a budget. Step number 2 we'll consider next week. We'll have a meeting on June 27th to consider specific funding for a project. And then step number 3 is all the reporting that we get to do for the next 20-some years to make sure that we're in compliance with the laws, to make sure that the developer has followed through with the commitments that they made, to make sure that the city has followed through with our commitments as well. Why should we consider TIF on this project? Staff really believes that this is the best financing strategy to achieve the public goals without overburdening any particular property owner. The parcels that are included in this district are either tax exempt or vacant. And in the past, and this proposal would put those properties back on the tax rolls to the benefit of all the taxing agencies. This would also break stride from our past practice. I'd mentioned we used tax increment financing before in the 70s. We did it in combination where we used TIF to pay for 80% of the costs and then assessed all the business owners the remaining 20%. So whether they were on the block, whether they were 2 blocks away, whether they were a small business or a big business, we included everybody in there. And that was the agreeable solution 30 years ago. A few years back in 2014, we made a major renovation to the parking structures, and we've heard loud and clear from our business community that they cannot handle another special assessment at this time. As you recall, we painted the ramps, we put in new pavers throughout most of the district, added some new street lights, the new wayfinding system, new paint, to really try to spiff it up a bit. So we think that by using TIF on this project, we can use funds that are created from this redevelopment of the center ramp to finance the public improvements that will result there. For this project, there's a myriad of challenges to the redevelopment. Just the demolition costs. We've got, there's some bad soils, there's some petroleum byproducts in the soils, so we need to do environmental remediation. The site is very close to some neighbors. The new building that the developers will construct, in some cases, is just inches away from existing businesses. So we have to be very careful that we're not disrupting that business and shaking their windows loose while we're building this new building. In Edina, we've spoken about affordable housing for many years. In this project, we don't want to just talk about it, we want to deliver it. And there's a cost to deliver that. And also in this project, there are a number of different public realm expenses: the new plaza, the new Wooner, public art, public plazas, new streetscape, new sidewalks, far over and above what a typical project would include. There's a cost to that as well. And finally, the structured parking has costs. The developer is willing to build an extra level of parking on his project that would then be dedicated and allowed public use on that level. So there's a number of different costs that qualify there. In Edina, I'd mentioned that we use TIF relatively sparingly. So this chart shows how much of Edina's tax base is included in a TIF district. So we're the little green bar kind of in the middle. About 2.6% of our tax base is currently included within a TIF district. And right now we have three: the Pentagon Park District, the Grandview 2 District, and the Southdale 2 District. By comparison, a lot of our neighbors are much, much higher than we are. Some of our neighbors are lower than Edina is. But if you look at our immediate neighbors, Bloomington has about 8% in their district. The same with Minneapolis. Hopkins has about 10%. St. Louis Park has about 10%. Richfield has about 11%. So again, different cities can decide what is the right mixture for them. But in Edina, we always try to be on the lower end of this range. And even with the creation of this district, we're still on the lower end of the range. I had mentioned that Edina has used TIF before. We've used it very successfully. I pulled some numbers from the archives, and it's kind of interesting. When you look at the 50th in France district that was created in the 70s, the tax base of the commercial district was $112,000. Over the life of that redevelopment district, it grew to over 1.6 million, or an increase of over 1,300%. By comparison, if you want to factor it in and put it in context, the overall growth in the entire city's tax base grew about 13 or 14%. This district, with this tool, grew over 1,000. So that's one of the things that you want a TIF district to do, is to incentivize growth and investment in your community. We also had a similar story in the Grandview district when we created that back in the 80s, and also in the Centennial Lakes when we did that one in the 80s. We've had a lot of good success stories. I won't go through all the detail. But for this district, we are trying to be very strategic in what we're including in the TIF. While the past did include 18 acres in the TIF district, we don't feel that that's the right thing to do this year. We do recommend including 9 parcels in this new district. It's about 16% of the entire 50th in France district. And these are the parcels. They're all on Market Street, or formerly known as 49th and a half Street. And these are the parcels in yellow that are owned by the Edina HRA. 8 of them are tax exempt. 1 of them is still on the tax rolls. That's the old Hooten Cleaner. We knew that redevelopment was coming, so we didn't go through the paperwork to take that one off the tax rolls just yet. We've had each of these buildings inspected by Stantec companies, and they were found to be in compliance with the Minnesota statutes to enable the use of tax increment financing. And then in the TIF plan that's included in your packet tonight, there's a number of different estimates and projections. The experts at Ehlers Public Finance provided these for us. They noted that the original, or actually the existing tax capacity in this area is around $15,000. That's the Hooten Cleaner building that's still on the tax roll. Once this project goes through, and if we work with the developer to return all these properties to the tax roll, automatically that number will more than triple, up to about $72,000. So instantaneously there's a benefit to the county, to the schools, to the city, to all the taxing districts, because that base just went up. But after the developer finishes their project, we're estimating that the overall value in this district will increase by at least a factor of 10, ultimately reaching a peak of about 1.5, 1.6 million. And that's exactly what you want a tax increment district to do, is to grow and increase your tax base in a way that provides public benefits, opportunities for business growth, and for private investments. So in the TIF plan, we also include a budget of how future tax dollars will be spent. We estimate that there's close to $29 million in taxes that are likely to be collected over the next 26 years. And those dollars would be used to reimburse for land acquisition costs, for site preparation and utilities. Of course, almost everything at 50th and France is old as far as the infrastructure. So there's, I think, 3 or 4 electrical transformers that, of course, are in the wrong places for any modern use. There's sewer pipes. There's underground water pipes that are not in the right place or need to be improved or relocated. There's the soil remediation and the contamination. And then with any of this investment for financing, there's interest costs as well. So that's another big driver in the use of the future tax funds here. Oftentimes we're asked, what's the impact of a tax district, of a tax increment district, to other government agencies? Certainly there's 3 of the largest agencies in Edina would be the city, the school district, and the county. There's a number of smaller agencies as well. The impact to any of those is usually very, very small. But looking at the table here, Hennepin County, for example, has a total capacity of about 1.6 billion. And this TIF district, as is proposed, is less than 0.001% of their tax base. For the city of Edina and for the Edina School District 273, our tax bases are roughly the same, about $100 million in that ballpark. And this proposed TIF district would be less than 0.1% of that tax base. So my point is that the impact to any of those districts should be virtually negligible. To wrap things up, the TIF statute requires that we do a but-for analysis, and that basically is to ask the question, but for the use of TIF, will great things happen to this area? Will the private investment come? Will the tax growth happen? Will the new jobs happen? And we have determined, using the projections that Ellers has prepared, that while some investment might be possible, development and investment to this extent would never be possible. So it's our opinion, it's the opinion of staff and our legal and financial advisors, that it is reasonable to conclude that significant private investment will not occur without the use of tax increment financing in this district. And that is a summary of the presentation. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them now. If there's questions regarding legal matters or finance matters, Mr. Anhut and Mr. Lindgren are here as well.
Mr. Neundorf, questions for Mr. Neundorf. Member Fisher.
So, Bill, you talked about a negligible impact to the school district as a result of this TIF district. Wouldn't the real answer be that there's absolutely zero impact? Because they're going to get the same taxes that they get today. So that little Hooten Cleaners, whatever that small amount that's going to the school district, will continue going to the school district throughout the term of this TIF district. It's just that all of the future tax increment that's coming in will just be delayed going to the school district. We're going to hold on to that and make these public improvements, and then eventually they're going to get their revenue, but they're not losing out on anything that they're getting today, right?
You're exactly correct. This is well, yes, they're not losing out on anything today. In this particular case, they're actually gaining today. Because right now, all of those properties are tax exempt. The minute that the city sells them and puts them back on the tax rolls, that new tax base is enjoyed by the schools and the county and the city and the mosquito district and everybody else. So in this case, they should actually see an upside.
Manager Neal.
Yes, that's correct. They have several tax levies that aren't captured by a TIF district, so they apply on the new market value or on the new market value as it's created. We don't have that, but the school district does.
Okay, that makes, is that why your slide showed there was a number like 75,000 and then the asterisk said 15?
Right, right.
So that the difference is now what today is considered just off the tax roll goes on the tax roll at the start of the TIF district at that basis.
Right, as early as 2018.
So it's a net positive for them. It's not negligible or a backward step. It's a positive step.
Other questions for?
Just some clarifications. I know you've already answered these questions for me. The reason for drawing the boundaries on the TIF district and why we didn't include the post office or the Bespoke or the Walgreens buildings, and possibilities for the future on that.
Yeah, great question. So certainly as we've gone through this process over the last 6 months, we've had lots of conversations with the surrounding property owners. Certainly some owners are interested in changes in the future. The post office property had been sold a few years ago, and likely that will change at some time in the future. That owner is not ready for a change today. Similarly, the location where Bespoke is located was also sold a few years ago. That owner is interested in changing things there someday, but they're not ready today. So after consulting with Ellers and reviewing the TIF statutes, we can always amend these boundaries if those developers are ready, and if TIF is necessary for those projects, we can certainly expand these boundaries. But for today, we didn't want to be speculative. We know that we've got a great project in front of us that has a financial gap that needs to be solved. So we thought, let's solve this problem today rather than trying to predict what might happen in the next 10 years.
Member Stewart.
And the other thing, the next regularly scheduled meeting for the City Council is the 20th of July. Sorry, the 18th of July, right? And you mentioned almost in passing that there will be a special meeting next Tuesday, a week from tonight at 7 o'clock here in this room. Just to make sure we're totally transparent about that, can you explain why we're doing that and why the timing?
Sure, sure. So there's a couple reason for it. There's a common sense reason. There's a legal reason for it. But with this proposal, we are essentially proposing to sell parcels of land that are owned by the Housing and Redevelopment Authority. Number one, this is a big project. We've had public input from day one. We want to continue that before we actually take a final action. But also state law requires that we hold a public hearing to give any interested party the opportunity to speak in support, in opposition, to ask questions. We didn't want to do it all at one time. So it does mean an extra meeting for our council members. So we did schedule a special meeting on June 27th at 7 p.m. We will convene the Housing and Redevelopment Authority to hold the public hearing and give any final consideration to consummating this deal. And we will also have probably a very brief city council meeting to affirm that action. So that's coming up in just a week.
Thank you. Anything else from council members? And are you expecting that Mr. Anhut or Mr. Lindgren to make any portion of a presentation to us?
That's a great question. Let's put him on the spot. Did we miss anything?
All right.
All right. I think we're good.
All right.
Unless you have any further questions.
I will move on and open the matter up for public testimony with regard to what you call step one is should we establish a TIF District 2 for the 50th and France area. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to come forward now that the public hearing is open and testify regarding this matter? Yes, sir. Welcome.
My name is Steve Buss. I'm a resident at 6400 Interlochen Boulevard here in Edina. I wanted to speak in support of the establishment of the TIF district. I spent time in the city looking at sort of the transformation over time. I've worked with members Fisher and Staunton on the Public Works site for a couple of years. And we talked a lot about the city and the change in the public investment that's occurred over time. I think there's an opportunity in terms of the establishment of this TIF district to really take advantage of an opportunity to move 50th and France forward, to support the project that's been proposed and worked on to get to this point. The 50th and France neighborhood is one of our few sort of urban character locations within the city, and really the continued investment of the city benefits the residents, the region. It's an important neighborhood for my personal life. We enjoy spending time there, and this TIF district really moves the project along and really establishes sort of the future as we've talked about, and I think that's important for the city, and as a resident of the city, I'd like to see that continue and that investment and tool be used in an effective, thoughtful way, which I think it will be based on the plans for the redevelopment and the TIF aspect of it and what it supports.
Thank you, Mr. Buss. Good evening.
My name is Heather Wallace. I live at 4701 Towns Road. I was listening to the requirements for the TIF, and one of the requirements was but for the TIF, it wouldn't be developed. And it seems to me that if you need the TIF to develop it, that says something about the value of the area. And I don't think it's true that you need the TIF to develop it. I think you need the TIF to develop it in the way that you prefer. And I think part of the charm of it and part of what attracts people is the variety, that different business owners and different landowners, different landlords have different approaches to their business. It is a little bit of an ecosystem of a lot of different things. And the city council's goal is to put this great big thing on it. And I don't think that without the TIF, I think other things could happen. I think the RFP went forward and it was all set to do this big thing instead of allowing an organic development. And I would prefer to see an organic development. And I don't think that the TIF meets the criteria of but for. So
Thank you, Ms. Wallace. Anyone else? Excuse me, anyone else? All right, is there a motion to close the public hearing? Got a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Discussion? All those in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say nay. Carried. Let's go back to that question Ms. Wallace raised about the but-for test. And someone want to explain the criteria for the but-for test? Mr. Neuendorf covered it briefly, but I think a little bit more detail on the but-for test would be important here to consider in the context of the concern that Ms. Wallace raised.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Anhut.
The statute actually does provide an explanation or a definition of that but-for test in one light, and it basically hinges on whether or not the improved value of the site, net of any public assistance that provided, is met through private development, or if there would be a comparable project that would provide greater public benefit, then essentially the but-for would not be met in that circumstance. So if there was a project that was coming forward that would propose what you are anticipating in this development, and it was in excess of $35 million in taxable market value, you would not be able to make this finding. However, through the RFP process, through some diligence and looking at the developers' numbers, and whether or not they would be able to proceed without this assistance, we feel that we are safe in recommending that you make this finding, that but for this amount of assistance, you would not be able to achieve this level of development on this site. And I think there are probably some other nuances that Mr. Neuendorf could go into as far as the saleability of the parcels, the required public investment that is coupled with new projects in this area, but that's the basis of the but-for finding within the statute.
So it goes more to the expectation of achieving a level of development that we we could accomplish through the RFP as opposed to just waiting organically for things to happen. And but for,
Correct.
well, yeah, I guess that's a good way to put it. Okay. Any other comment? Mr. Lindgren?
Mayor, council members, I agree with everything Mr. Anhut said. I would just offer sort of an analogy of the way I look at it. What you really do in your requirement to have a but-for finding is recognize that what tax increment is it levels a playing field. It is essentially more expensive to do urban redevelopment projects than it is to do a greenfield development for all the obvious reasons. There are existing structures, as Mr. Neuendorf talked about, old pipes in the ground and all the rest of it. And I always think of what the but-for is doing is that you will see a development that has a development pro forma that once the developer proves to the satisfaction of your team that all the proper equity sources, all the proper loan sources are in place, there's a negative number at the bottom to fulfill the vision that you've just set forth through the land use approvals that you've given, and there's a negative number. And without a way to fill that negative number, the project wouldn't occur. So but for the use of the increment that can be generated from that project itself, you wouldn't have a project. And again, in my opinion, looking and working on this, and for all the technical legal reasons that Mr. Anhut mentioned, that's exactly the kind of scenario that you have here.
All right, good. Thank you. Member Brindle, did you have a question or comment?
I do. And the use of TIF is something that we do really think very hard about. And when I look at this project, there's a significant amount of this project that is for the public domain. It is public parking at the expansion of the north ramp. It is public parking below the development in where the center ramp is now, and where the Edina 50 lot is now. And there is public space. There's open public plaza space, if you will. And that is all part of this project. Now, if TIF is not part of this project, I think those things have to go away. Because that's what creates the minus sign at the bottom of the column, is the inclusion of the public space. So I'm not willing to give up the public domain portions of this project, because without that, it's a nice project. It'll be nice, but it won't draw the public into it. And that is what 50th and France is. It's a public gathering space. And I think we have a responsibility, as we do, to provide as much parking as we can for the public, to get them into 50th and France, can keep it vibrant. We have a responsibility to also create those public spaces for gathering, to not just come, park, eat, and go, or come and park and shop and go, but to stay and to enjoy the area. So for me, that is why TIF is necessary for this project.
All right, colleagues, we have Mr. Neuendorf's recommended resolution 2017-68, which would adopt a modification to the redevelopment plan for the Southeast Edina redevelopment project area, establish the 50th and France 2 tax increment financing district, and adopt a tax increment financing plan, therefore. Is there a motion to adopt that particular resolution?
So moved.
We got a motion and a second to adopt resolution 2017-68. Further discussion or comment? Member Staunton?
Mr. Mayor, I just want to reinforce this point one more time. I think Councilmember Stewart mentioned this earlier, and Mr. Neuendorf, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that the action that we're taking now is to create the district, and the specific assistance that might be provided with increment from the district and the terms of that, et cetera, is what we will address at our special meeting next week.
That's correct. The scope of the resolution this evening is strictly to create the TIF boundaries.
So this gives us the tool to then have the discussion next week about the precise terms of what would happen here. All right, thank you.
Good. Thank you. Any other discussion? Comment, Member Fisher?
I would just say that, you know, all across the state of Minnesota, there are communities creating TIF districts because they're begging and trying to get developers to come and build stuff. We don't have that problem. When Edina creates TIF districts, at least as I look back in recent history, we do it because we want to use this opportunity to enhance our infrastructure. And this is a classic example of that. You know, this is about an old parking ramp sitting in the wrong spot and a lot of other things. And, you know, when I look at the numbers for this development project and look at the reasons why we would do this TIF district, this is why you have TIF districts. And I think we're being responsible in how we're potentially setting this up, and I think it's the right thing to do. I would just comment that Mr. Neuendorf did a really nice job kind of laying this out, and I really appreciated sort of the history of development in this area and how we've used TIF. It really sort of helps put this all in context. So nice job.
Other comments? Discussion? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Gentlemen, this was some very, very fine work. I would concur with Member Fisher that it was one of your finest moments here with our city so far. Thank you. Very well done.
Your Honor, the HRA is scheduled to take essentially the same two actions here, and maybe it won't be very long, but it'll be later tonight. If you want the professionals to stay around, they can. If you already have asked and answered all your questions, we'd probably let them go.
I'm okay.
Yep.
Enjoy your evening, gentlemen.
They're not excused. We're going to talk about the project first, and then they'll be excused. Yes. So hold your seats.
All right. We're going to move on to the next portion of the agenda, which is reports and recommendations. And Mr. Neuendorf has the next matter as well, which is the proposed sale of and redevelopment agreement for the properties we've been discussing at 3925, 3930, and 3944 Market Street. Mr. Neuendorf.
Yes, thank you. So this is a little bit unusual tonight. I'm going to present a full and complete project, and I'm going to ask for your discussion, and then I'm going to ask you to think about it for a week. But this leads up to our special meeting for next week, where we think this is an important enough matter where we don't want to just rush it through on one evening. I had mentioned earlier that we issued the request for proposals last year, did the interviews with different developers, selected this one. We've been negotiating with this team for 6 months now. Mr. Lindgren and Mr. Anhut have been absolutely essential and frankly super helpful to those negotiations and preparation of the contracts that are in front of you tonight. I'm going to walk through some of the major points. Same thing, happy to answer any questions, whether it be from a legal side, a deal side, a timing side, a schedule side. We also have in the audience our development partners, Brent Rogers and Pete Dienovic with Saturday Properties and Buell Investors are here with us, as well as some of their key staff that have helped us along the way. So happy to discuss some things and answer any questions you might have. And also just as an aside, when the council passed or granted the final approvals just a few hours ago, and you had some conversation about easements and blockout areas in the basement and some questions about affordable housing and how that works. We've been holed up in a conference room for the last couple hours, and we don't have all the details, but we think we've got a path to make sure that we can achieve the directions that you gave us. So I'll provide a little bit of input on that here this evening. let's see, so this is the project history, which we just talked about. So for this project, we are really seeing this as another example of a public-private partnership in Edina. The intersection of public entities like the city and the Housing and Redevelopment Authority and the private sector. This is not a new concept for Edina. We've done this for decades, frankly. The Centennial Lakes development was another fantastic, even larger scale example of a public-private partnership. But by taking this approach, we really hope to strengthen and take the strengths that we bring as a public agency, coupled with the creativity and the nimbleness of the private sector to come up with an even better project. So this project consists of two separate and distinct phases that are right across the street from one another. The first phase is the expansion of that north parking ramp. That ramp was originally built in 1991, expanded about 10 years later. We propose to add a fourth floor to that, and also to add parking on the adjacent parcels that are currently vacant. Along with those vacant parcels, there'll be parking on the upper levels, but there'll be commercial space on the street floor, on the street level. This will be a publicly designed project, publicly bid, and publicly financed. The cost estimate is $10.7 million, a significant investment. The second phase is the construction of this mixed-use structure with the apartments and the commercial space on the first floor. You've debated this and discussed this at length. There's a number of different public elements on the south side of the street that we think are essential. I'll walk through some of those details in a few moments here. But that private investment has a budget of about $74 million. So again, not too bad for a bunch of tax-exempt vacant properties. The images of the before and after, you've seen these for the last couple months, but they keep getting better and better every time we look. This is a site plan and an overview. On the north side, or the top of the page, is the completed expansion of the north parking ramp. The areas where my cursor is, this would be the future commercial space. This is on top of this is currently the Hooten site. This would be a commercial space where the Edina Realty had their branch office. And then on the south side of the street is the new commercial space, the new public plaza, the new Woonerf, all the shared walkways. Underground would be more public parking. The location is very similar to the TIF map I just showed before. It's the same site. So in a nutshell, if I had to describe this transaction, we are proposing and recommending that the HRA sell the real estate for redevelopment purposes. It's not a matter of selling it for the highest dollar. Our goal is to get the best project for the community, the best project that has a balance between commercial interest, residential interest, public benefit, public good. The actual transaction would happen in two stages. The first closing would be in January of 2018, where the developer would pay the HRA $5.1 million. We would take those funds to begin construction of that north ramp expansion. We would also take some existing tax dollars that are available for these types of purposes and use that to round out the budget. The second closing would occur towards the end of 2018. After the north ramp is constructed, we would then sell the commercial space to the developer for $1 million. One other thing to consider as we go through the budgets tonight and talk about all the forward-looking projects, I also just want to remind folks and to recall that we did buy these properties. I mentioned that a few moments ago. We did not include the real estate expenses in these construction budgets. We've looked at that as pretty much a sunk investment cost that we made a few years ago to further public benefit. So the dollars that you see here this evening are strictly construction and design, architects, engineers, inspectors, other folks like that. The north ramp expansion would begin in January of 2018. It would be about a 9-month project, and we would be we'd be about half finished by April, and we would be completely finished before the holidays in 2018. That's something that we heard loud and clear from the business owners. They could stomach some construction and some disruption in the winter months, January, February, March, a little bit of April. That's the slowest period down there. But they really encourage us to be up and running by the time late October hit, November and December. So we've staggered the construction to make that happen. This is, again, a more colorful rendering of the North Ramp expansion. The retail spaces are the pinkish shade. And then on the bottom of this page shows the new facade. There's some green panels. That would be a living wall. That was heavily discussed at the Planning Commission. And then there would be additional artwork. We'll figure out the content as we go through the design process in the next couple months. But we really want to get away from having a lifeless parking structure and really try to create a street where the pedestrian, the customer, wants to keep walking down to the next shop. So we think some improvements are necessary here. What I did not show here is the backside of the building. We heard your comments earlier in your zoning approvals. There is additional information in that zoning packet that shows the landscaping, and we'll continue to work with the adjacent property owners to make sure that it's an agreeable situation there. This is the construction budget for the North Ramp. $10.7 million is our current estimate. We feel pretty good about this. And this comes to about $34,000 per stall. Structured parking is expensive. Oftentimes people talk about free parking. It's free for the customers, but it costs $34,000 to deliver free parking. In this budget, we included about a $500,000 contingency to account for unknown circumstances. And we feel that's a good estimate for this time. At the end of the day, we'll expand this parking structure from about 260 stalls to a total of 573. We'll have returned 2 of the components back to the tax rolls with a healthy, robust tax base with 2 businesses in there. And in order to fund this project, we're looking primarily at the land sales, the $6.1 million we'll get from the developer. The developer, through our negotiations, has also agreed to fund around $621,000, which is the cost of building the concrete box around their future commercial space. So they will contribute more for that. And then we're looking at an environmental grant. We've applied to Met Council and Minnesota Department of Economic Development and Employment. We should be hearing from them in the next couple weeks for those grant requests, and that's for all the environmental work. And then the last source of funding is our Centennial Lakes TIF district. This is an older TIF district that towards the end of its years, it continued to amass tax money. And the state law allows us to use those monies to further other economic development goals in the city. So back as far back as, well, maybe not as far back, but in 2015, we had a conversation of how we could best program those dollars to get the most bang for our buck. And we budgeted around $4 million to be invested at 50th and France to further the goals of that district. So we're proposing to use about $3.8 million out of that fund to further these goals. So that's our financing proposal there. On the south side of the street, similar story, I mean, much different project. We would sign the real estate agreement next January, but work would not begin until April 1st. And again, the goal there is that we want to get that north ramp spiffed up with a new 4th level added, and then we would begin demolition work on the center ramp. There might be a couple weeks overlap as we meet with contractors and get the final details. There might be some overlap where there's a parking crunch based on input we've received from the businesses and working through a number of different schedules. We feel if there is going to be a parking crunch, we need to get it situated in that time of the year where the parking demand is lowest, March and April. So there might be occasion where we are short parked for a time. The developer has agreed to provide either valet service or shuttle service during that worst case scenario so that employees can still get to work, so that customers can still get to their appointment, to their lunch, to their shopping, et cetera. And again, as this comes in for permit and final reviews in that regard, going through staff, we'll work with staff and with the business association to make sure that we've minimized any disruption there. But the remainder of the project, we've scheduled to be done simultaneously. If you might recall, when we first considered this proposal was for a nearly 2.5 to 3 year construction period. And as we got into the nuances of it, we realized that if we stagger it properly, we can condense that to about 1.5 years. And so that's our recommendation here tonight. There will be some disruption, there will be some dust in that 1.5 years, but ultimately we can be finished with the messiest work in time for the 2018 holidays and be finished with everything in time for the 2019 holidays. So we feel it's the best available schedule. Let's see, I have a couple of images of the project here, which I'm not going to dwell on. This is the budget for the south side of the street. This is our development partners project. $74 million. The largest proportion goes to the actual construction costs. Of course, they have architects and engineers. They have financing costs. They have project management costs. And that's what gets them to the $74 million. But as Councilmember Brendel mentioned earlier, this project has a lot of public benefits. Benefits that a lot of similar projects in town have not delivered. For example, this project will deliver the outdoor plaza, about 6,000 square feet. The Woonerf, which is about 8,000 square feet. All the other walkways and byways and sidewalks, all told, that costs money, close to $2 million. The underground parking costs about $4.2 million per level. And one of those parking levels they will donate back to the city with an easement, so there's another $4 million. Not to mention, I'd mentioned some of the utilities that are in the wrong place. It's about $2.5 million to relocate those utilities and construct the foundations in a way that we're not breaking the windows on the neighbors next door. So there's a few $1,000,000 there. Not to mention the acquisition costs that allows the city to build the north ramp. So there's about $12 million of public benefits related to this project that other projects don't have. Like, for example, when Byerly's built the 71 France, they had lots, it's a great project, I don't want to talk bad about that, but they didn't have any of these public benefits. When Lennar came in and built the Onyx, great project, none of these types of benefits. So the cost structure here is much different than other projects that we've seen in Edina. In order to make their deal work, they are bringing in a larger than normal dose of equity, cash into the deal by investment partners to the tune of $18 million. They'll use traditional debt to finance the construction, about $42 million. I mentioned we applied for a total of about $2.3 million in grants. We've been working diligently with each of the agencies. We're feeling pretty strong about the competitiveness of those grant applications. With those contributions, we have about a $11 million gap. And what that means is the cost of all these public improvements, plus including affordable housing, costs money. We're recommending that the city issue a TIF note to help reimburse the developers for some of these extraordinary costs. We're also recommending that the HRA provide a loan, not a grant, but a loan to help subsidize the cost of these affordable units. Over the last hour or so, we've talked about how that affordable housing loan could be restructured, and I can get into that if you have questions on it. But for the time being, let me finish running through this. So for the affordable housing loan, this is something that was recommended from the very beginning. The developer has committed to having 10% of the units be priced affordably. that costs the developer about 1.4 to 1.9 million in lost revenue for 15 years. So the challenge is, how do you make the developer whole? If they, quite frankly, if they weren't providing public plazas, public parking, public easements everywhere else, we probably would have pushed on them just to suck it up and deliver it. Instead, they're providing all these public benefits, and frankly, there's not enough cash available to round that out. That's why we're suggesting a loan in that regard. We have also reached out to the Edina Housing Foundation, and while initial efforts did not bring us to an agreement, we think we can reapproach them in the next week and see if we can find a way to better solve this gap, this financing gap. And then from the TIF perspective, our recommendation is to issue the TIF note I had mentioned. Basically what that is a big IOU that requires the city to make payments on the note if the developer finishes the project. If they spend the money, if we go in and check their books to make sure that they spent what they told us they had to spend, they deliver the project, they've got a certificate of occupancy, the thing is up and running, they've given us the easement documents for the plaza and the parking. If they follow through with all of their commitments, we will follow through with reimbursement for them. We feel that this is warranted in this case, and I might ask Mr. Anhut to comment on this. But we've looked at the numbers. We've looked at the budget on several occasions over the last 6 months. The developer's return, or their anticipated return on this, is much lower than typical projects. I would argue even with TIF, it's on the lower end of what a developer considers acceptable. We've had several pleasant conversations with the developers. We've had several uncomfortable, tough conversations with the developers. We feel this is the best deal to put forward to make the project happen. So we feel it does meet the but-for clause there. Other terms and conditions, as far as, anytime we talk about public finance, we want to make sure that the risk to the public is as little as possible. It's the developers that are in the risk business. The cities typically are not. So in this project, the responsibilities of the developer, including bearing the risk of putting this project together, getting the equity, getting the financing, hiring the architects, doing all those things. The developer has agreed to bear all the costs of the cities getting involved, hiring some of the best minds out there to work on the public behalf. The developer will pick up those costs. As far as coordinating the construction of 2 different projects across the street from that also falls into their realm. They've committed to providing the affordable units. They've committed to providing permanent, perpetual easements for plazas, walkways, underground parking, and then last but not least, shared trash rooms, which are not so important to the customer, but they're vitally important to every business on that block. They need a place to simply dump their trash. This was not one of the funnest conversations with the developer, but they have agreed that they would host and be the shared trash room for every business on that block. The developer will also be responsible for managing their apartment building as well as our underground parking structure to make sure that it stays in tip-top condition, safe, bright, secure, convenient. The commitments on the city and the HRA, on the other hand, are important, but I would argue less risky. So we commit to providing a public finance tool by creating a TIF district. We have offered our consent to allow them to submit grants for this. They do require city consent. We've agreed that we would transfer the ownership of our property with a whole bunch of restrictions and conditions to meet. We committed to expand the north parking ramp. That $10.7 million investment on the north side enables this private investment to happen. If we don't improve the north ramp, the south side of the street will remain the same. They're really symbiotic. They have to work together. And then as far as some of the maintenance obligations, the city has a special law and a special ordinance that allows the city to assess the business owners at 50th and France for those maintenance costs. It's a practice we've had since the early 1970s. It was a precursor for a special service district or the business improvement districts throughout Minnesota. And that process has worked very well for 40-some years. We intend to continue that same process. So the maintenance of the new public parking, the maintenance of the trash rooms, the maintenance of sweeping the plazas, fixing the fountain when the pump fails, all those types of things would be borne by the maintenance district, just as is done today. So while the project is new and while it has a lot of new life in it, a lot of the policies that we're assuming remain the same. And let's see, let me skip through that one. So that I'd mentioned these 3 public easements for the public parking. I have kind of excruciating detail and bullet points here. But we do have a separate easement agreement that we've negotiated with the developer regarding the underground public parking. The fact that they will build it, they will own it, they will help manage it, and we will help pay for that management and for the cleaning. For the private parking, because there is one layer of private parking as well for the residents, that is not a public obligation. That is purely a developer obligation. So this parking easement is strictly for that first level of parking, about 128 stalls. And we have discussed that for next week, we intend to modify the easement that's in your current packet tonight to reflect a condition where that easement could be extended for these knockout panels. If at some point in the future a neighboring property owner wants to build next door, we would we'll reach agreement where this easement will be modified to allow a neighbor access through the public parking ramp to get to their basement. That should solve or avoid some traffic problems on 50th Street. Maybe we use that in 5 years, maybe we use it in 40 years, but we'll have it written into the document by next week. The other main easement is, frankly, what I think the residents and customers are going to enjoy the most. That's the walkway, the plaza, the Woonerf, all the pedestrian ways. You've seen the renderings in the packet tonight. I mentioned every time we look at these, they get better and better and better. It's about a 5,000 square foot plaza, about a 7,000 or 8,000 square foot shared street or Woonerf. It's outdoor space that's designed for pedestrians. There'll be bike racks, people can bicycle to get there, but it's designed for pedestrians first and cars second. So certainly a delivery truck could drive on the shared street to service the D'Amico, for example. Parents dropping their kids off at college nannies and tuners will have 3 drop-off pickup spaces right in the front door there, so they could certainly drive there. But most of the time, this space is outdoor enjoyment. Trees, benches, those types of things. The total circulation space in the outdoors is about 34,000 square feet. That's a number that has not changed since we were here back in April. Some of that square footage is your more typical sidewalks. There's sidewalks around the perimeter. We'd expect that for every project. But for this project, they provide 3 ways through their site, three paths to get from that north ramp to the existing businesses, from Spillane to whatever restaurant reopens where Matzamia had been, down to Bellison's, down to the theater, and that, again, that's going over and above what we require of most projects. The easement also has agreement that while the developer owns the structure, the city will bear responsibility for the plaza, since it is a public plaza. It'll be up to the city to reasonably determine what happens on the plaza. Is there live music? Is there art festival? Is there pumpkin festival? It's a public space, so we can determine what goes there within reason, though. I mean, certainly if the city decides that we're going to have an all-night music festival there, At that point, the easement gives the developer rights to raise the red flag and say, nope, my people need to go to bed after midnight or something. So we've been pretty reasonable with those conditions. And then the final easement is the ever glamorous trash room easement. Again, a small detail, but in the 1970s, the city made the commitment to get rid of all the ugly, nasty dumpsters from cluttering up that back area. And we agreed to work together as business owners and have shared trash collection points. So we'll continue with that agreement. I think the only thing we're going to do a little bit differently is have nicer rooms. We will have cameras in there to make sure that the employees that dump the trash dump it in the right place and don't leave the broken TVs on the floor and the bags of asbestos or whatever it is. And we will ask the business owners to do the right thing and, you know, take care of the space. So there's lots of documents in there. Also in your packet earlier this evening, there were conditions about the parking solution during the construction phase. I had walked through that in my earlier comments about trying to get as much of the invasive work done in the winter months when there's fewer customers, in hopes that we would have most of the more invasive work finished by the time the customers are back there. And then finally, anytime the city enters into any kind of agreement with developers, we employ legal minds to make sure that the city is not taking undue risk and to make sure that we're using public dollars wisely. So in this case, there's a couple of key things I want to mention. The first precaution that we've included in this agreement is that there will be a go-ahead letter issued. What that means is before the city commits to hiring a contractor, we'll have a letter from the developer and their lenders and their bank saying, yep, your financing is ready to go. Go to it, guys. If we don't have that letter in hand, we're not going to move forward with the north ramp. So in case something goes horribly wrong, we're covered in that regard. Also, when it comes to selling land, we've restructured the timing of this so that the developer monies comes into the game first. So the $5 million for the center ramp for $5.1 million, the city will have that in hand 4 months before the developer even can touch that property. Again, we felt that was a security interest that made us feel most comfortable. When it comes to that TIF note I mentioned, $10.1 million is the maximum. We do include what we call look-back provisions. So when we finally start making payments on the note, we have the opportunity to look back at the books to make sure that, frankly, they actually have earned the $10 million and have expended that amount of money. We might find that they've only earned $9 million or $8 million. If the records show that they earned 11, that's the risk that they bear because we maxed it at 10.1. So we have those types of provisions. Also, when it comes to issuing the loan for affordable housing and making those TIF payments, those payments will only happen after the project is finished. So during the 18-month construction phase, if anything goes haywire, financing falls apart, the markets go crazy, the developer bears that risk, not the city. We don't start making payments until you can actually walk into that building and sign a lease or go shopping. And then, of course, in any legal contract, there's a number of different remedies and default clauses. In the odd case that the developer cannot secure financing, the HRA has the right to retain the land, so we don't lose out on that future opportunity. If the developer is unable to finish the project, we don't have to pay them on any of our notes or anything. We also have included reversion language. So again, if something would go horribly wrong, the land theoretically would go back to the HRA. And also, if the developer is unable for whatever reason to purchase those north commercial sites, we would retain the $620,000 that they gave us up front to build the box, because we're going to build it anyway. So if something goes horribly wrong and they can't close on that, the city is still protected, and we've got that budget covered. So we've spent a lot of time on this. I'd mentioned some of the conversations were easy and friendly. Some of them were contentious and difficult. But at the end of the day, I believe we have a proposal in front of you that is the best available proposal to deliver a great project for the next generation. Happy to answer any questions you might have, whether I might have the answer, Mr. Lindgren might have it, Mr. Anhut, or any of the developers, but we're pleased to have your discussion.
Another very thorough presentation.
I just think I'd like to ask questions next week when we have more of a final proposal in front of us.
Other members? All right.
Thank you. I have a couple of
Comment.
questions. So, and this might be for Mr. Anhut or Mr. Lindgren. I wonder if you could just give us, part of what we're doing here that's unusual is we get the peek under the hood, so to speak. We get to look at the financials of the developer so that we're ensuring that if we are giving some kind of public assistance, it's not more than is necessary to accomplish the job. And I'm wondering if either one of you can give us just a little bit of a sense of what we do in that process to satisfy ourselves.
Thank you. Great question. It's really coming in two parts. Right now, we have been provided information as far as their projections for the income that will be derived from operation of these assets. So the rental income from the housing units as well as the commercial tenants and their spaces. And we're able to look at that income that's generated off of that property, look at the upfront investment in terms of the equity that's being provided and the overall cost of the project, and really come to a determination that there is a need for public assistance, just given the level of that budget that Mr. Neuendorf presented and several of the public amenities that are included within that budget. There is a lower return than we would expect to see the market bear for this type of project and this kind of use.
So on that issue, how, with this return issue, how do you benchmark what's a reasonable expectation for return and then this range of higher to lower?
Right, so I would say that what we have done is we've provided really three different looks, three different ways of evaluating that. One is the return on cost. So the return on the overall upfront project cost, that $74 million price tag. As we look at the income that's derived from these properties, it's performing below market expectations for what another project we had anticipated to bear. Another one is looking at the return on equity, the amount of equity that they're investing up front, and whether or not that return that's generated again from the income of the project is commensurate with the amount of risk that they're taking. This is a real estate project. It's not an investment in the city's bonds, U.S. treasuries, or something that we'd expect a fairly low return in the, what today would be 2 to 3%. On a project like this, the level of risk involved, we'd expect a return on equity in excess of 10%. Would be a reasonable expectation for any private developer, and this is performing below that expectation, even with the TIF assistance included. The last one I would mention is that we also look holistically. We understand that these are going to be valuable assets that are held for a period of time, but they could be sold on the marketplace, and so we've also included in our projections, looking forward 15 years, given what we understand in the marketplace today and the value associated with these commercial aspects or commercial assets, what could they generate in proceeds if they were to sell these properties? And we've included an internal rate of return calculation to accommodate not only their upfront investment, the cash flows that they anticipate to achieve over time, as well as those sale proceeds at the end of their investment term, and really boil that down into a percentage that we can compare. And again, they're performing what I would say is below market expectations, primarily due to some of these costs that are being incurred up front. And we've also, I would just say, to hedge, again, I mentioned the first part of our look is looking up front. We've also included language in the agreement that's in front of you, and we'd expect to have that language carry through to next week, that not only will you be able to resize potentially the TIF note if, as Mr. Neuendorf mentioned, there is a lower project cost. That $74 million turns into $64 million, and there's not a need for that level of a gap. You'd be able to resize the amount of the TIF contribution accordingly using these same metrics that I just mentioned, as well as at the end of the life of the district, at the year 15, we've actually included another look back where you can look at that internal rate of return calculation. And if there is, a very sizable return to the developer, what we've set as 22%, essentially you'd be able to downsize the TIF obligation at that point for any amount of proceeds generated above that threshold. You'd be able to reduce your future TIF obligations so you can shorten the term of the TIF district, and a win-win for both parties. Essentially, they're delivering a profitable project, and you can rest assured that but for that assistance, you're still meeting that obligation within the statute.
And to put it colloquially, this isn't your first rodeo. I mean, as Ellers, you do this on a regular basis for cities all over the state, right?
Correct. So, not only myself representing several communities throughout the state, but I'm also backed by Ellers and Associates, our firm. We've got over a dozen advisors that provide this same economic development incentive analysis for the majority of the state, as well as some other regions throughout the country.
And I just want to return to an item that Mr. Neuendorf mentioned, but I think it's important to emphasize, is that the risk on this is entirely with the developer, because it's what we call a pay-as-you-go TIF note. So the idea is they have to upfront the money at the front end of the project, go through the project, and it's only after it's completed, as the increment comes in, that they are paid the TIF. And if insufficient increment comes in, we don't pay any more than the increment, right?
Correct. So the terms of the note are that the city will potentially reimburse up to 10.1% of present value expenditures that are made on the project, as long as the developer can demonstrate that they needed it at the time of completion. And that'll be payable only from 90% of the increment that's generated from the project within the TIF district. So they do have to provide the upfront financing for the project, construct, undertake, manage the property to an extent that these taxes are actually created, and then they'll come back to them over time of the full, potentially 26 years of the district to reimburse them for that
and
upfront investment.
that other 10% is designed to cover our costs as a city in running and administering this and reporting, et cetera.
Correct.
Okay. I think that's all on that point. Mr. Neuendorf, a couple of items that I did want to ask about. One is I saw in the documents that were, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but we're talking about providing some level of backstop to the potential grant revenues that we're applying for. I think it's $500,000 that we're proposing. So my question is, can you give us just a little bit of explanation about that, and then tell us a little bit about what your estimate is about our ability to actually land those grants and not need to provide that backstop?
Yeah, great question. Happy to respond to that. So we've applied for about $2.3 million worth of grants, or either have applied or in the process of applying. You have another agenda later this evening to give the final step. So there's two types of grants we've applied for. One is the environmental grant. That's around $1 million, I think, in the range of $1 million. We meet all the eligibility requirements. We've got the approved, we've been working with MPCA, the Pollution Control Agency, for months. So we have the approved RAP and have followed all their requirements. So we feel good about the funding opportunity. The only challenge is that this year, almost twice as many projects applied as in typical years. So we've spoken with both of the grant agencies, and at this time, they're not sure how they're going to respond to that. Do they only fund half of the people? Do they fund everybody, but only for half of what they requested? We won't know what their response is for another 2 or 3 weeks. But it is possible that we might not be fully funded. And in this case, as Mr. Anhut had mentioned, the overall financing deal for the developer is pretty skinny at this point. So if we are short in some of those grants, we've negotiated that the HRA would pick up some amount and make some extra contribution up to 500,000. But that's much less than the total of the 2.3.
So it's 2.3 is the total amount we're seeking in grants as that piece of the puzzle, so to speak. And
Correct.
we've reserved the possibility of contributing up to 500,000 if the grant money comes in short.
Correct.
Okay.
And the redevelopment agreement doesn't get into utter detail of which grant comes in high or low. There's just too many uncertainties. So that is something that would be left to the discretion of staff as we move toward that final closing date to figure out what is the actual need.
Then the final thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is the affordable housing. As I understand the structure of the proposal, we're talking about a loan to the developer that would be, there's some terms that are, I think, still being negotiated, but partially from the HRA, partially from the Housing Foundation to the extent they're willing. And I guess my big picture comment on that is I think it's really important to have the affordable housing in this. I think it's important that we do it as a loan instead of a grant, so I'm pleased to see that. I understand there's some negotiation to be done on the interest rate, but I'd like to see continuing conversations happen with the Housing Foundation as well as staff for the HRA. I do think it's important that we include the 10% and that we have a mix of types of units. I know the Housing Foundation had suggested that 2 of the 11 units be 2-bedroom units and the other 9 be 1-bedroom units. I think that's an important thing going forward. I think it's important for us to establish as the public partners in this project the value of including affordable housing and meeting our policy. So, Mr. Mayor, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. Anyone else? Well, there's a meeting next Tuesday, and you can take up more questions then. You have an opportunity in the gap period to think more about this. So, thanks for that presentation, Mr. Neuendorf. And you are up next on the proposed resolution identifying the need for a livable communities demonstration account funding and authorizing applications for grant funds. So you're looking for the council to endorse that idea and approve the resolution that authorizes 2 grant applications.
That's exactly correct. So this is Resolution 2017-64. And this is required to submit our grant application to Met Council. They have a grant program called the Livable Communities Demonstration Fund, and that is specifically targeted to help support projects that have outstanding public amenities, projects that serve the local community as well as the region. So there's a set of criteria that Met Council uses to evaluate each of the projects. We initially reached out to Met Council about 3 and maybe a 4th potential project. And as we walked through those with their staff back in January and February, they felt that there were 2 projects in Edina that would be best suited for their potential funding. That was the Edina Collaborative Project on Market Street and the Avenue on France, just west of Southdale Mall. They felt that those projects had outstanding potential to be funded based on just the sheer quantity and quality of the public realm amenities. So they encouraged us to move forward with those 2, and that's what the resolution in front of you tonight requests. The Met Council does make it a little bit of a challenge for cities when we apply for more than 1 project. I have worked extensively with both developers on the projects and assured them that they have our full support. But Met Council asked that we pick a favorite. And so we have identified the Edina Collaborative as being slightly favorable as far as our support. The only reason that there's a difference is that we feel that the Collaborative is a little bit further ahead in the readiness perspective, which is a major qualifier for Met Council. But based on the fact that we've got final approvals, we've got a funding plan nearly negotiated, by the time that we submit this grant application, we think we'll have almost every piece of the puzzle in place, which makes this a slightly stronger application than the Avenue project. So this evening in front of you is the resolution for your consideration. Happy to answer any other questions. If you do offer your consent, we will submit the grant application by the deadline of June 29th.
Is there a motion to authorize the city manager to submit on behalf of the city applications for Met Council Livable Communities Demonstration Account Grant Funds for the project components identified in the applications which deal with the collaborative and the Avenue on France projects? Member Staunton has moved it. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say nay. Carried. And then one more matter in this section of the agenda, which is the resolution approving grants and donations. Resolution 2016-65. Is there a motion to accept the donations?
So moved.
Second.
All right, got a motion and a second to accept the donations embodied in Resolution 2017-65. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say nay. Carried. Donation of a sculpture Lucy figure skating donated by Tom Collins. It's at the Braemar Arena. Thank you, Mr. Collins. And now, correspondence and petitions. We have a petition opposing athletic fields at Fred Richards Park that requires receipt on the part of the council. Is there a motion to receive that petition?
So moved.
Got a motion and a second to receive the petition opposing athletic fields at the Fred Richards Park. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say nay. Carried. And Manager Neal, anything other than what we have on the dais this evening?
No,
for
that's
correspondence or petitions? All right. Aviation noise update. Member Brindle.
Really no update at this time. Nothing has happened since I gave you the last update. It's just that the next meeting of the Noise Oversight Committee will take place at the MAC office on July 19th at 1:30.
All right. Manager Neal, anything to add on that topic? All right. Mayor and council comments. Member Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few things. Again, looking behind and looking ahead. On June 7th, 4 of us were able to attend a greater MSP event at which a gentleman named Richard Florida was the speaker. He has a new book called The New Urban Crisis. I've only cracked the cover, so not yet through it, but I thought his comments were intriguing and caused a lot of thought, and I think will generate some good discussion among us. A reminder that on Thursdays at Centennial Lakes Parks, 2 things go on. In the afternoons, there is a farmer's market from 3 o'clock to 7 o'clock. And at sunset, there are movies at Centennial Lakes Parks. So that happens during the summer. I've been to a number of high school graduation parties. Congratulations to all of the high school graduates. I'm, again, honored to be able to do interviews for high school students who are applying to be on our commissions. These student commissioner interviews, I'm blown away every time by the amazing talent we have in our 15, 16, 17, and 18-year-olds that I get to see. So that's been very interesting to do. And then today, I was able to attend the opening at Aurora in France. That's an amazing facility. And the folks there have done a beautiful job, and the staff there is really nice, and the people that I talked to who are now living there couldn't sing their praises more nicely. Oh, and I almost forgot, on June 15th, the mayor and I attended a groundbreaking for the new Homewood Suites Hotel that's going in on the corner of 66th and York. So that should be exciting. Looking ahead, I love the 4th of July in Edina. The parade is always a lot of fun. The fireworks are fantastic over at Roslyn Park. The Sousa Band just always does a great job. So if you can get out to enjoy the 4th of July with all of us, it is, I think it's just fantastic. So come on and enjoy that. Because the first Tuesday in July is the 4th of July, we're only going to have the one meeting in July. So our next meeting will be on July the 18th.
Thank you, Member Stewart. Member Brindle.
Thank you. Let's see here.
Fresh back from...
fresh back from an adventure.
Yes.
Yes, it was fabulous. We
Whitewater rafting in the Grand
went on
Canyon.
a guided whitewater rafting trip along the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. I would highly recommend it. It's so much fun. There were 3 number 10 rapids. Lava Falls is a 30-foot drop and takes 22 seconds, and you are through it. But no, it was way fun, and it was huge. And I have a few photos for those of you who would like to see them, but they're about that big on my telephone. A couple things. June 7, 8, and 9, I spent 3 days in Denver at the Community Action Partnership Law Conference and learned a lot. Community Action Partnership of Hennepin County serves the poverty population, the people who live in poverty in Edina. And we have a significant poverty population in Edina. And they need help with a variety of things. And Community Action Partnership of Hennepin County serves all the cities in Hennepin County, including Minneapolis. So it's really an enormous job. And so this conference had a lot to do with compliance and strategies, board strategies. And so I learned a lot. I really appreciate the opportunity to go. On Thursday morning of this week, I will attend the Hennepin County Needs Assessment session at the Center for Changing Lives, and that's also related to the Community Action Partnership work. And so it'll be interesting to see on a county level what the needs assessment shows, what they look for, what they study, and again, some strategies for how to move forward and how to address the needs. On Thursday afternoon, I will attend the Highway 169 No Mobility Study meeting in Bloomington, and which has nothing to do with the closed highway construction. It's really having to do more with how to ready Highway 169 for transit, for park and rides, and it has none of those today. I've noticed at Braemar Golf Course, where there is prairie planting, there's a whole bunch of weeds that really ought to get out of there, because the prairie plants are going to be compromised if we don't pull some of the weeds that, I don't know, every few years there's a new weed. And our backyard is all wild, and I'm up there ripping and tearing the stuff that is, and last year there was a new one, and this year it's kind of prevalent again. But every couple of years there's some sort of new plant that appears from nowhere. So I would like to see if we can thin those out and give the prairie a chance. And then finally, last, Ralph and I attended the annual fundraising event for the Southdale YMCA last night at Centennial Lakes. Often they have a gala, and this year they tried something different. It was a wine and beer get-together. It was a blast. Fulton Brewery donated all the beer, and Edina Liquor provided, they poured and provided, helped us put on this event. There was wine, there was beer, there were a couple of food trucks. It was great. Everybody had a good time. So Anyway, that's my report.
Very good. I heard you did more than participate. I heard you helped run the event.
Oh, yeah, but it was fine, yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Member Staunton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last week, Wednesday through Friday, had the chance to attend the League of Minnesota Cities annual conference, and that included the annual meeting of the board of directors. We every year we have some people who cycle off of the board, and we add to the board. And I served on the nominating committee, had a chance to hear from a whole bunch of elected and appointed officials from across the state who are interested in serving, and we have just an incredibly talented and generous pool of people, and we're able to appoint some new folks. And one of the appointments is also the new second vice president, which is basically the line of succession to become the future president in our neighboring city, Hopkins. Mike Morrison, who's the city manager in Hopkins, was elected as the second vice president. It was a difficult choice because Tim Busey, who is a council member in Bloomington and is also a terrific contributor to the league for years and years, was also in the running for it. So we couldn't make a wrong choice. They were both two terrific people.
Boy, that's a tough choice.
And the conference was excellent. There was one of the things in the interviews that we really heard about. One of the questions we asked is, what do people think are the big issues? And it was an interesting kind of informal survey of what's going on in the state. Certainly issues of the urban-rural divide are big with folks. How to deal as public entities with changing demographics, not only of race, immigration, but also of age. We heard from a lot of people who were concerned about getting young people interested in government. And so, Member Stewart, I was noting then that your work on interviewing our folks, I think we should be, I'm very proud that we have so many young people in our community participating, and I wonder if there's ways for us to even think more broadly about not just the potential of serving in elected or appointed office, but perhaps taking it up as a career. I know Manager Neal has a long tradition of having a city management fellow every year. I met yet another one on the nominating committee who reminded me immediately that he was one of your proteges. So it's important for all of us to be sharing with folks the benefits of this service in local government. We also had a keynote address from Clarence Anthony, who is the executive director of the National League of Cities, was pleased to be back in Minnesota again and said he was feeling at home because he's made several visits. We talked about a number of national issues, but the trend that we've talked about at this dais before of state efforts to preempt local control on issues was one that he said he's seeing in states all over the country. And so we need to continue to be vigilant in reminding people that we are every bit as accountable here in local government, and perhaps even more so than our friends who serve at the state legislature. And absent some compelling reasons, folks ought to let us mind our business here in the cities that we know so well. So it was a terrific conference. Happy to have the chance to represent our community on the League of Minnesota Cities board, and looking forward to another year on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Fisher.
All right, I'll keep my comments pretty short. I did also attend with a number of you the Richard, Florida session. I thought that was really good. If you're into urban design kind of conversations, which I am. Next week, I'm going to be attending the Economic Development Association of Minnesota conference that's up in Brainerd. And so I'll be hanging out with TIF nerds, basically. So a lot of the people in the front row, probably. So anyway, I'm gonna put a pitch in. I'm actually leaving after our recently scheduled special meeting next Tuesday. So let's keep that kind of short if we could. I wanted to comment about you're talking about young people in government, and that sounds great. And frankly, is why I ran for council, to sort of bring the average age down here on the council. Sorry.
Because you're such a youngster.
The last thing I'll say is we're through the baseball season with Edina High School, and my son plays, so I was, all through, I was actually very fortunate. I only had 2 conflicts through the whole season that conflicted with council. Unfortunately, the last one was our last meeting where they lost in sections. But the good news is that for the second year in a row, the team that won our section also won the state tournament. So Eden Prairie just won last night. So we still have the strongest conference in the state, even though Edina hasn't been in there the last couple of years. So I think that's it.
Yeah, very good. For my report this evening, I would say that I attended the Partner Advisory Council meeting for Greater MSP on the 9th, a couple of days after we were all in attendance at the Richard, Florida meeting while you were whitewater rafting. Explore Edina, Manager Neal and I attended the Explore Edina meeting on the 13th, and then that afternoon we attended the MLC meeting in Lakeville, and there was a legislative update, and I don't know if you brought all those packets back that I gave you, and you can each expect a legislative update packet from Manager Neal. And then Member Stewart mentioned the Southdale groundbreaking for the new hotel under the Hilton brand. It's going to be a terrific addition to our community. And then I jumped in the car and drove down to Rochester, spent a little time with Member Staunton, as some of the mayors in the metro are trying to team up with some of the mayors in the rural area to work on this urban-rural divide problem, reality or myth. And I think we've come to the conclusion that it is reality. And we had a good conversation, several of us from the metro area, with mayors from Bemidji, Granite Falls, and Olivia, and Rochester was there too, but it's hard to call them a rural city based on what's been happening down there. So that work will continue now through the Regional Council of Mayors, and we're going to try to figure out a strategy to get out to Greater Minnesota and work on this concept of being one Minnesota. That we've all got different issues that we need to address, but let's address them together and make this state even stronger than it already is. So. Somebody mentioned Braemar. I guess Member Brindle. The weeds at Braemar made me think of the tour of Braemar Golf Course, if anybody's interested. Thursday morning, 8 o'clock, the architect will be here. I intend to be over there to wander around with him for an hour or so to see what's happening with respect to the work that's being done over there, all the shaping that's going on. Eager to see how some of the holes are laying out. So that's something a lot of folks in our community may be interested in as well. And then Thursday through Tuesday of this week, as Member Stewart says, looking forward, I'll be attending the U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting, which is in Miami Beach, which should be an interesting experience in late June. So I'll report back on all those activities when I see you again on the 18th of July. Actually, I'll see you the night of the 27th. I come back on around noon the 27th. I'll see you the night of the 27th. But we won't have time for that on that particular evening. So that's it for me. Manager Neal.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just a couple of things. One, there is a groundbreaking event at the Bank of America next week on Thursday the 29th at 4 p.m.
Groundbreaking or opening?
No, grand opening, ribbon cutting. Okay. Sorry. Okay. You're right, ribbon cutting. But you're all invited to that.
When is it?
29th
Thursday,
at 4.
The 29th at 4 o'clock. Okay. Town Hall Station is open. They had their soft opening this
heard
weekend.
It was hopping.
I was coming over here at 4:45, or around 5 o'clock, I guess it was, and the place was packed already. Patio was full. People waiting to get in.
Wow. Cool.
And just to let you know, Lisa Schaefer, Assistant City Manager Schaefer, and I are visiting with our colleagues in Richfield on Thursday to begin the process of discussing the renegotiation of our 911 service contract with them. So we've had some experience with them now. We know a bit more about what their needs are and how to serve them well, and we're going to have a more in-depth discussion about that than we had in previous years. That's all I have.
All right, very good. That prompt anything else from council members? Otherwise, we'll adjourn and go right back to work as the HRA. We've got a few things to cover. Council meeting stands adjourned. Calling to order the still June 20th meeting of the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority. Roll call, please, Ms. Tim.
Commissioner Brendel.
Here.
Commissioner Fisher.
Here.
Commissioner Staunton.
Here.
Commissioner Stewart.
Here.
Chair Hovland.
Here. We have a form of meeting agenda in front of us this evening. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda for the HRA?
So moved.
Second.
We got a motion and a second to adopt the meeting agenda for the HRA. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say nay. Carried. Consent agenda items. There's 3 of them on the consent agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second to adopt the consent agenda. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And then we have one action item, which is HRA Resolution 2017-05. Its companion we've already voted on, which is 2017-68 on the City Council agenda. And Mr. Neuendorf has this one as well.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you. This is Resolution 2017-05. It essentially affirms the action of creating the new tax increment financing district over at 50th and France. The presentation is the same as given earlier. The content is the same. If you do have any other questions, I did ask our advisors to stick around in case there's any last minute questions. But with that, I would.
No, we
I would
shouldn't
stand
have
for a
him go
motion.
through the whole thing.
Aren't we a whole different board?
Our youngest member has short-term memory loss. And he'd wonder if after we adjourn, you could give him the presentation again.
Yes. We'll be here till 3 a.m. It'll be great.
All right. Is there a motion to adopt HRA Resolution 2017-05?
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second on that particular resolution. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And then your presentation for the HRA, I assume would be identical to the one you did just a short time ago?
That's correct, exactly. Just a reminder that you've heard the presentation tonight. We had some of the preliminary discussion tonight. Next week, we'll hold a public hearing before we actually take action on the item. But I did want to ask Mr. Lindgren to step up in case you have any last questions. Jay will not be able to be with us next week. He will have his trusted assistant with us, but if you have any last questions, I just wanted to make him available.
Questions for Mr. Lindgren from any council member?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I might say I apologize it will not be here. I will be on an adventure, not nearly as good as Commissioner Brendel's, but I will be out west. I would also just comment that, as always, it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to work with your team and put together documents. I mean, there are a few final changes that we will recommend, and I think we'll make sure that we'll present those in a clear fashion. But I think you have a very significant document that you'll be looking to give final consideration to as the HRA. But are there any other questions? I think we just wanted to make sure, since I won't be able to be here in person, that I would give you that opportunity.
Any questions for Mr. Lindgren?
Can we reach you by cell phone?
I'm going to be deep in the Rocky Mountains. Mr. Neuendorf has said he's ordered a satellite phone. I'd be happy to answer it if he provides it.
All right. Well, we wish you the best on your adventure.
I don't have any questions.
All right. Any other questions? This requires no action. And while you may be recognizing a blank stare from Mr. Fisher, who can't figure out what it was you were going to talk about, that's the end of the HRA meeting. Anything further for the HRA? Any more quips from anybody before we sign off?
Signing off.
All right, we stand adjourned.